Ties to our constitutional partnership document run deep here in Te Heko o Tika, and I'm here to represent my district and express the Far North District Council's strong opposition to this bill. Partnership is at the heart of our submission to this bill. Over 50% of our 75,000 Far Northerners are of Māori descent, and this council is only one form of local government in our district, serving our people alongside 144 marae, 10 iwi runanga, and over 250 hapu. I was reminded at Waitangi commemorations last week that honouring Te Tiriti is not a destination but a journey that this nation is on to live up to and honour the binding agreement signed between the Crown and our tupuna here in the north 185 years ago. The Far North District Council is by no means perfect in meeting our obligations to the Treaty of Waitangi under the Local Government Act, but we are on our journey. This bill compromises decades of work that this council has put into our local partnership with Māori to realise and give effect to our vision of He Whenua Rangatira, a district of sustainable prosperity and well-being. Our Far North Rangatira, Sir James Henare, said, "Ko tawhiti ke tō haringa mai kia kawe haere tonu, ka nui rawa wō mahi kia kawe mahi tonu. You have come too far not to go further, you have done too much not to do more." I am proud of the journey that the Far North District Council is on, how far this organisation has come, and I am optimistic about how much more we have to do to get our district ahead in partnership with iwi and hapu here in Te Taitokero. Quite frankly, this bill is an unnecessary distraction from the real work that we are doing and still need to do here on the ground with our treaty partners, and risks taking us back as a district, something we cannot afford on any metric, be it social, environmental, cultural, or economic. The Far North District Council is on our journey to be Te Tiriti-centric, and the Treaty of Waitangi is key to every one of our frameworks, strategies, policies, plans, and bylaws, as well as a significant number of memorandums of understanding and working groups that we have. The costs alone that this bill will place on our financially constrained organisation to reinterpret and redefine our very being are impractical, unreasonable, irresponsible, and nigh on impossible. Should this bill be legislated, this council will have significant risks and issues that will impact our communities and disproportionately affect the significant number of iwi and hapu we have in our district. Iwi and hapu who we are working alongside to make the Far North a better place for all of our people. We welcome you to Te Heko o Tika to see the power of localism and meaningful partnership in action between the Far North District Council and Māori. Partnership that gives effect to our obligations to the Treaty of Waitangi. Obligations, might I add, that you yourselves gave us under Section 4 of the Local Government Act. We implore the members of this committee that this bill is taken no further and that the coalition government honours Te Tiriti o Waitangi and throws this divisive bill out. The Far North District Council strongly opposes the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. Because I'm optimistic about our future, I close with a welcome. We welcome you north. I have tea towels with your names on them to come and see the work we are doing. Come and see the power of meaningful partnerships that uphold the true contemporary current principles that we use to interpret both Te Tiriti and the treaty that we have today. Kia ora koutou. I'm happy to take questions.
Kia ora, Mayor. Thank you for that. I see Steve Abel has a question.
Kia ora both. Thank you very much for your excellent and substantive submission. I wonder, is it correct to say that this bill effectively sabotages the framework for the relationships that the Far North District Council has with hapu and iwi?
Oh, it absolutely sabotages it. I mean, Principle 2 of this bill will put iwi and hapu against each other because we have unsettled iwi and hapu here in the north. And two examples, one, Kaitaia Airport. Now, we were able to get that over the line. Us here in council were able to get that over the line because the Crown was stalling. And we did that by bringing together both a settled iwi Ngai Takoto and an unsettled iwi Ngāti Kahu. Under this Treaty Principles Bill, it will mean that only our settled iwi here have more mana to work with us than our unsettled. And I'll let Councillor Kapa talk about our Kaikohe wastewater working group that we have with Ngāpuhi Hapu.
So the combination of working with a collective of hapu will enable the council to negotiate and work and collaborate so that we're able to come out with a better outcome for our wastewater that allowed a collective approach to how the disbursement of our waste to land, and all that negotiation was actually done through the relationship that we had with hapu and our council.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Asi Takata has a question.
Mōrena korua, moko korua tai tēnā korua. Mo te ranga tini whanaunga o te tai tokerau tēnā koutou. Gee, we saw last year through the the Māori wards legislation that actually the majority of local councils, their CEs, their mayors, they support having a Māori ward. And what came through quite clearly is that they've actually been doing the work on the ground, the groundwork to learn what's important to Māori. They've done the groundwork around coming to the realization of the base of the Māori resource in their rohe. And they know that those things aren't going to vanish. The resources of the Māori people, be them iwi or the people themselves, are going to be in those rohe for a long time. So they're largely in support. And just in the last couple of weeks, the reports come out, the polling's come out, showing that 72% of the people in Aotearoa, Pākehā, Chinese, Māoris, whoever, 72% want to see Te Tiriti o Waitangi honoured better. So is that the sort of general feel that you see amongst your colleagues, moko koruatahi? Is that the general sentiment, and therefore do you think the bill is just way out of line with where the majority are?
Oh, it's absolutely way out of line with the majority, especially here in the far north. I mean, I talk about our council being on a journey. We have been on a journey. That journey has been slow. But with our Ngātai o Tokerau Māori Ward councillors sitting at the table with us, we've had exponential growth. Our government talks about growth. If we don't have Māori here in the north at the table with us and empowered for us to work with, then we're never going to see that growth. Then we'll always be the poor little cousin far north that you guys always have to lump so much money onto. We're ready to go, and all we need is to press on. And this bill is just a waste of time, to be honest.
Moku ake Ferris, he huarahi kotitike. Tuatui ngā kaupapa, tino nui mo tātou.
Te kōtiti kātika, yeah.
Look, thank you for that. We've got a couple of minutes left if you need it, but I'd be just interested, from my perspective, I'm an MP from Christchurch, on your comments on tino rangatiratanga and the fact that you work essentially in partnership, and what that means, both to Pākehā New Zealanders as well as Māori New Zealanders.
I'll use another example, right? When I talk about distractions and cost effectiveness, our council, we're currently under under the emergency weather order. We're under a 3-year long-term plan because we are still recovering from the significant effects of Cyclone Gabriel. Now, one of those has left us. We still have 39 significant slips. 2 of those slips are in North Hokianga, where I'm from, at Panguru and Motuti. Now, the partnership that we have with iwi and hapu have meant that we've been able to get our consenting and our works over the line much faster so that we can repair and restore the far north. If this bill were to go through, then it would compromise those partnerships and those relationships that we have built, and making us being able to work faster and more agile as an organisation.
Thank you for that. All right, our time is up, but thank you very much for making the time and making a very comprehensive submission as well. So kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
Members, our next submitter is to Oho Mai Services. Waiting for them to come online. Almost there. Kia ora, Poata. I can see you here, but I can't see your face. If you want to get the camera on. Kia ora, Poata. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee. And thank you for your submission. We've got 10 minutes to hear from you. So without further ado, just let you speak to your submission. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ko te atu o tō tātou piringa kāputa kaura. Ko tau kei te wāhingaro koutou rā ngā tāratara o rehe. Hoki wairoa mai ki tēnei huihuinga whakahirahira. Ana tātou te hongora e mihi nei e tangi nei. Kia ora hui tātou katoa. E mihi ana ki tō tātou ariki nui ngā waihono i te pō me tōna wharekau i ariki i re hau pai mārire. Talo whalawa i le suafa le atua, ki ora ana koutou kā toa i te roa mahata o te atua. Ko poata wātene tōku ingoa, he uri noroto mai o Ngāti Mahanga, ko tērā taha ōku, he uri no te whānau tau whāo, tēnā koutou katoa. So today I'm attending this oral submission in my capacity as the Pou Whakarai or CEO for Tūoho Mai Services, who are a specialist family violence kaupapa Māori NGO in the Waikato. Our kaupapa is anchored in King Tāwhiao's tongikura that states, tupu te toi, ora te toi, whanake te toi I ahu mai Hawaii. Grow, nurture and foster the knowledge derived from Hawaii. Our practice in kaitiakitanga as a kaupapa is anchored in te riti o Waitangi. At this stage, I also wish to acknowledge Charlotte, my tuahine Charlotte and the Family Violence Clearinghouse for their expertise and guidance. I wish to state that Tūoho Mai unequivocally opposes the Treaty Principles Bill. I acknowledge the Māori and Pākehā legal academic experts and rangatei who have spoken before me opposing the Treaty Bill's principle. As mentioned, we are a kaupapa Māori family violence specialist NGO that has operated in the family violence, sexual violence sector for 33 years. We deliver whatikura and Māori kura healing māramatanga pathways for whānau experiencing family violence. In 2019-2020 financial year, we supported around 2,800 individuals experiencing family violence. And for the 2023-2024 year, this increased to 5,600 individuals, of which 63% were Māori. The most recent police data shows that there were no less than 19,000 family harm call-outs by the police in the Waikato for the same period. We provide crisis services as part of a national and regional first-tier family violence response focus. We deliver and facilitate behavioural wānanga, programs and interventions focused on accountability for perpetrators, or what we call rauputohe, and safety awareness, safety planning for rauora or victims. We deliver individual play therapy and interventions for tamariki experiencing family violence and facilitate behavioural change wānanga across a number of local high schools and colleges to support youth experiencing violence within a home environment. Again, 60% of these youth are Māori. We provide 24/7 residential support for rauputohe or perpetrators who are issued with a police safety order and are removed from the residence. In terms of our submission, as mentioned, Tūoho Mai unequivocally opposes the Principles Treaty of Waitangi Bill. Our opposition to the bill is based on our commitment to an honourable and meaningful treaty relationship and partnership with mana whenua. In our context and mahi environment, this includes whānau and hapori Māori within the Waikato. In our service, te tiriti o Waitangi is the foundation for whanaungatanga or successful relationships and meaningful engagement for all New Zealanders accessing our services, particularly Māori. This places us in a unique position to effectively address disproportionate representation of Māori within the family violence, sexual violence sector. Kaupapa Māori, Te Ao Māori healing pathways and methodology is anchored in whakapapa and whanaungatanga, and this is why Te Tiriti o Waitangi is fundamental to achieving successful outcomes for whānau. Today's opportunity is about the people we serve and as an organisation and our commitment to preserving their voice. Te Tiriti o Waitangi provides a proven evidence-based foundation that promotes relational engagement, reinforces meaningful whanaungatanga or therapeutic relationships that assist in the achievement of improved outcomes. It's fundamental to building a therapeutic alliance with whānau that anchors our services in whakapapa and whanaungatanga and wairua, which are three key elements to healing, recovery, and growing awareness within a family violence kaupapa Māori environment. So I'll talk to Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake. Over the months and weeks, I've listened to novel interpretations of Tino Rangatiratanga by others who are not qualified or recognised as mātanga or subject matter experts within Te Ao Māori. So this has created confusion in my view, particularly for non-Māori or those who are yet to take up the opportunity to educate themselves with our country's history. Despite recent misguided interpretations, Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake isn't for everyone, and Aotearoa New Zealand needs to be okay with that. And here's why. For Māori, Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake is simply a way of living. It's intrinsic, it's instinctive to our way of thinking, it's philosophical to our way of being. It's intergenerational, and is preserved and handed down through our lived experiences, pūrākau, whaikōrero, karanga, karakia, hui, and our traditional cultural institutions like our marae. It's a lived experience of 1,000 years of occupying this whenua and land, the wins, the losses, the gains, and the heartaches during that period. For the few out there attempting to interpret Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake without viewing these elements or lived experiences through a lived experience or Māori worldview, you're likely distorting the true depth and lived experience, but that's okay, because I'm here today to steer you in the right direction. Tino Rangatiratanga pre-existed the signing in 1940, and we've lived it for 1,000 years in Aotearoa. But this shouldn't be twisted and reinterpreted by the few who do not live by tikanga values in their everyday life. And let me explain. Whilst Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake is being socialised and promoted by some as equality or a tool for racial division, it's actually about living and breathing kaupapa and philosophically living in a way that normalises Te Ao Māori expressions of culture. Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake provide unique approaches to achieve better outcomes for those who are disproportionately represented across all of the social determinants of health. Our kura kaupapa around the country are great examples and expressions of Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake, because the evidence shows that these cultural institutions are achieving outstanding academic results. Iwi, hapu social services, kaupapa Māori, Te Ao Māori NGOs across the majority of the sectors are another successful expression and manifestation of Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake. Despite the recent rhetoric, their success doesn't impact or disadvantage Pākehā or non-Māori at all. However, are fundamentally critical to achieving evidence-based results and outcomes for the masses and majority accessing the hundreds of social services across the country. As mentioned previously, the masses are in most cases Māori. All this successful achievement and outstanding outcomes is achievable because we live and breathe Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake. These are tremendous examples of why Pākehā and non-Māori need not fear Tino Rangatiratanga or Mana Motuhake. Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake in essence is simply Māori being Māori to improve intergenerational toiora or well-being for our future generations, our tamariki and our mokopuna. It's not a privilege, neither is it an advantage. It isn't divisive, and it certainly isn't something to be feared. In fact, it's inclusive and engaging. It's historically passed down and has been entrenched over hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a consciousness, a wairua, a mauri that's inclusive. O tēnei mea te Tino Rangatiratanga, te Mana Motuhake, he mea tuku iho, he mea tūtiru, koe ia hoki ko te wana, koe ia hoki ko te wana. Tihei mauri ora.
Kia ora. Look, thank you for that. We've got some time for questions, just about a minute, so I'll go to Steve Abel.
Kia ora, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate your explanation of that concept of Tino Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake as things that have always belonged to tangata whenua Māori, and there's no need for non-Māori to try and co-opt them. In fact, that's a an affront to the concept. These are Māori concepts that are embodied by iwi Māori. You talk about constitutional legitimacy in your submission being afforded to non-Māori by Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so this affront to the concept of the treaty and how it embodies tēnā rangatiratanga for Māori, this undoes the constitutional legitimacy of non-Māori as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Tēnā koe te matu e te rangatira. I think, today for me was about preserving the voice of the people at the grassroots level. We call it pāhara keke, and giving them a voice around that legitimacy. And if we continue to reinterpret, long-standing, for example, tino rangatiratanga mana motu hake, unless you have a Māori worldview or you live by a tikanga experience, you're likely to distort that, and whether that's deliberate or not, you're still going to distort it because you don't really have the intrinsic or instinctive understanding of something that's been passed down over hundreds of years. So I wanted to keep it real today, and keeping it real meant to give a clear understanding and give a steer around tino rangatiratanga mana motu hake from a mana whenua perspective. More importantly, how that relates to how we deliver services to achieve better outcomes.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Puate, and thank you for the work you do in that space. It's important and difficult work. Members, that's the time for that submission. Our next submitter is Te Rapa Wahine Māori Toko Aotearoa, the Māori Women's Welfare League. So if we've got that submitter available. Dr. Hope Tupara, I think, is with us. Here we go. Kia ora, Hope. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee. We've set aside 10 minutes, and because time is tight, I'm just going to hand straight over to you. And if you'd leave time for questions, that would be fabulous.
Kia ora. I'll try and leave time for questions. I'm just going to take my written statement as read on behalf of the Māori Women's Welfare League. I'm going to focus on the justification for the bill that is set out as 4 bullet points in the general policy statement. The first bullet point to justify the bill and statute is to create greater certainty and clarity to the meaning of the principles in legislation. This bill is not motivated out of the goodness of David Seymour's heart to foster the full potential of Te Tiriti o Waitangi for our nation. We reject the principles of the bill for reasons explained in our written submission. The next point given to justify the bill is to promote a national conversation about the place of the principles in our constitutional arrangements. This is akin to trying to get a 2-for-1 deal, one bill to deal with 2 very separate significant subjects, Te Tiriti o Waitangi and constitutional transformation. On Te Tiriti, you've heard submissions that whānau are a bit more clued up about Te Tiriti thanks to this bill. However, there are still people who did not engage in the hype that this bill brought about. The hekoi, for example, at that time, when that happened, there were a lot of people in the middle of being laid off from their jobs, and their focus has been on their survival because of that fallout. On the Constitution, I asked some of my own whānau, what do you know about the Constitution? I've got mostly blank faces. I've tried to help them in the meantime, but I reckon that's the same in many households around the country. This bill is about creating a national conversation. We welcome those conversations, but you don't need this bill to do that. The third justification for this bill is to create a more robust and widely understood conception of New Zealand's constitutional arrangements and each person's rights within them. A definition of robust is something that does not break, like David Seymour's position on this bill. I put it to you that David Seymour is intent on achieving constitutional arrangements that only align to his party politics. His job is to work for all people, and based on his oral submission that he put to the subcommittee, he rolled out his usual tropes we've heard over and over again about perceived racial division and wealth and material equality. He confirmed that he is staunch to his own views. He opened his oral submission on this bill by reciting words from his maiden speech that he took out of Hansard's, and he emphasised in doing so that his view has not changed in 10 years. He has not been swayed from his view despite unprecedented reaction to this bill, or he's just not listening. This bill is driven by ideology. The fourth justification for the bill is to build consensus about the treaty Te Tiriti and our constitutional arrangements that will promote greater legitimacy and social cohesion. This bill is trying to fix a problem that the ACT Party leader is calling out as racism, that is trying to convince us all comes from Te Tiriti o Waitangi. That position is a complete misrepresentation of causal effects, and I hope I can demonstrate why. I listened to an oral submission in support of the bill that highlighted an underlying problem we have long had in this country when governments do not engage citizens in policy development, and there is a domino effect where individuals become the recipients of policy implications. Murray was the name of the submitter, and he talked about an Auckland real estate agent whose license to practice was revoked because she didn't want to enroll in a Māori language course. I'm going to fill gaps that Murray left out because he only told a part of the story. The real estate agent didn't want to do the Māori component of compulsory professional development because it conflicted with her values. Murray blamed the imposition on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, but it was the Real Estate Authority, a regulatory body, that introduced a Māori component in the training for real estate agents under the Labour government. I don't know that Murray has checked out the membership of the authority board. They look like mostly Pākehā people, and I know one of the board members, she's a great leader. That was a future-focused move by the authority because there is a growing number of buyers, sellers, renters in Auckland whose first language is Māori. Good on them for thinking about being ahead and being client-driven. When you're able to talk to a client in their own language, makes for a positive relationship, I would have thought. Māori is an official language of this country, so it makes complete sense. Yesterday, I rang a real estate agent I know who's mostly worked in Auckland, and he told me that the Real Estate Authority has removed the Māori component from their professional development under this government. The scenario of the real estate agent when she cannot see a connection to her job is what creates angst and causes divisiveness. I can recall very similar instances of students and health professionals in the health sector reacting to the same kinds of impositions on them in regards to cultural competence in health practice. Governments introduce policy, in this case, Te Tiriti compliance, let's say. Sectors try to respond to policy, often without any help or guidance from the government, no consultation with Māori or maybe shoulder tap a Māori staff member, but the leadership have little to no knowledge about Te Tiriti themselves, and it ends up with a story of conflict like the real estate agent story playing out now in the press. The real estate agent and Hobson's Pledge, who are supporting her, are rejecting the imposition of things Māori. Yep, we get that. That's what colonisation is. And Māori know a lot about colonisation. So let's reverse the table and say that Māori should be given the same consideration of not having another culture imposed on us. Currently, over 90% of Māori children attend a mainstream school because they don't have a choice. So those children are educated in English. Hundreds and hundreds of parents of Māori children, maybe also Pākehā children, will love their children to be educated in the language of Māori ancestors. And we know the academic achievement of Māori in Māori language medium schools is far better than in mainstream schools. Those whānau who are being treated unfairly know they are being treated unfairly. These stories do not make the headlines. I've asked Oranga Tamariki.
I've got a couple of questions.
Hang on, I'm going to finish this because I need to tell the rest of my story. I've asked Oranga Tamariki via OIA to tell me what percentage of Tamariki Māori out of the total number of Tamariki funded by Oranga Tamariki are under the responsibility of iwi Māori partners since 2017 to date. I have not received an answer, and that's not fair if we're to understand what difference we are making to devolve care to Māori. If we use David Seymour's own race card, you can't have a rule for one race and a different rule for another. We agree. To make things fair, you have to stop colonisation. If we want to stop colonisation, we need to develop it from something. That's what Te Tiriti o Waitangi gives us, not this bill. Te Tiriti o Waitangi gives us a platform to figure out how we can share the power that we have as a nation to ensure there is fairness. But we have people and institutions who like to have power and don't want to share. You've heard from those submitters about who they are. I'll finish them.
Thank you for that. I didn't mean to interrupt, but questions are often really useful, and Jamie Arbuckle has one.
Ka pai.
Thank you very much for your submission. I'm really interested in the discussion around national conversation, and it's come through really strongly on a number of submissions. And once this bill, the process of it's finished, I'm really wondering from you, how does that process start? And I'm probably going to lead you a little bit, but it has to start at a grassroots level. And I'm just wondering, how does that conversation begin? How does the government is involved in that, but how do you see that kind of having some merit and actually forming something that we can all be involved in? I'm just wondering what your views are on that.
Well, I don't really understand some of the machinery of government, but if the government was actually to help invest in developing the capacity to be able to get those conversations happening in communities, would actually be really helpful. I mean, we have forums that are set up already. Some people are engaged in them, some are not. But I think we've just got to start from somewhere and not be frightened to have those conversations. And, you know, just like this select committee process shows, we don't always have to agree, but we actually need to provide a platform so that ordinary people can engage in conversations where this kind of process might be quite scary, but they can go to their whatever local group and start to talk about it.
Kia ora, thank you, Hope. We don't have any more time, but thank you very much for your written submission and also an impassioned oral submission. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Members, the next submitter is Tangata Treaty Caucus of Community Law Wellington and Hunt Valley. And I see we've got Kate online there who looks like she's ready to go. You might want to move a little bit closer to the camera because you're coming in and out of focus. But that's great. We have set aside 10 minutes to hear from you, so I'll hand straight over to you to speak to your submissions, and we may have some questions if we've got time. So kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Duncan. My name is Kate. I am here today representing the Tangata Tiriti Caucus of Wellington and Hutt Valley Community Law. My role here is the community champion working on the alcohol harm reduction project, and this is my colleague Claire.
Yeah, morena koutou, no Kotarana, Airanga, me Ingarangi o Kutupuna, no Kotarana aho, ko Claire tuku ingoa. I work as a lawyer in our housing team at Community Law. So, as already stated by Kate, we're here on behalf of our Tangata Tiriti Caucus. You will have read a bit about that in our written submissions. And we wanted to sort of echo, you've already heard from a number of excellent submitters against this bill, and we would like to add our voices to the mix and share our thoughts on what it means as a Tangata Tiriti Caucus to stand in opposition to this bill and why we strongly oppose it. So as you've already read in our written submissions, we are a law centre and we see Te Tiriti o Waitangi as absolutely fundamental to the mahi that we do every day. It's a fundamental part of our law centre and the way that we operate. I guess in particular, we wanted to speak to the fact that as tangata tiriti, we are the supposed beneficiaries of this bill. We're the people that are meant to be happy and celebrating that we're getting equality. In fact, that's not how we see things at all. And so we really wanted to add our voices to the mix and represent what our caucus feels about this bill. And in particular, the sort of ways that being tangata tiriti, working with tangata whenua, having a sort of co-governance structure in our law centre makes us a better law centre, makes us able to deliver our job so much better, helps us run our services, make sure we're actually catering to Māori, catering to everyone, making ourselves more available, able to provide this free legal advice. We think this is so important, especially working in this justice space, given the inequities that exist here for Māori, but also it's important for every organisation in Aotearoa to be working towards honouring te tiriti, working towards having this sort of structure like we do. We really see te tiriti o Waitangi as something that enables us to come together and work together as a centre and just deliver the service that we provide. And we also wanted to share that being tangata tiriti is an honour. It's not something that we take lightly, and it's not something that we want taken away from us. Te tiriti is what gives us our right to be here in this place, and we really relish the opportunity to stand today in support of this document.
Well, having read our submission, you'll also know that some of our key points centred around our response to David Seymour's comments in Parliament when introducing the bill. We are all about helping people and meeting unmet needs. And there are a great number of other organisations with similar kaupapa in the social services space whose daily bread is all about helping people and making sure that our communities have their needs met. I wanted to draw further attention to an emerging trend for those community-minded organisations, the NGOs, spiritual organisations, unions, social services, all seem to be have reached consensus in opposition to this bill. We've already seen submissions from ETU, NZNO, Common Grace, Citizens Advice Bureau, Tangata Whenua Social Workers Association, and today there are submissions going to be from the Federation of Business and Professional Women, Māori Women's Welfare League, Tuhu Oho Mai Social Services, and the Tertiary Education Union, all in complete agreement in opposition to this bill. Alongside our colleagues at Youth Law, there's another one of our colleagues presenting today, and we believe that the movement are also presenting in this batch of submissions, all in opposition to the bill. So evidently, amongst those for whom helping people is more than just a polite suggestion, but a core for our identity, there's been no need for discussion to have that consensus. We do want to have a conversation about what honouring te tiriti looks like, but this anachronism of a bill has no place in that conversation. It's time for the government to catch up with us out here doing the real work to improve the lot of New Zealanders. If you want to be a legislator, just skip the division and pass policies that actually help people, is what I say.
Kate, we've got a couple of questions. Can we go to those now? Would that be useful?
I've got one more point to make before you.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, so we wanted to note that other submitters were asked, mostly by Todd Stevenson, whether they see the treaty as giving special rights on the basis of race. Since he's not here today, we wanted to proactively address that question. We reject this framework. Te tiriti is an agreement between sovereign peoples that guarantees the pre-existing rights of Māori and would be guaranteed to continue. It is not about special rights. It is about upholding our side of the bargain, and it is about ensuring tino rangatira. It's about our opportunity as tauiwi to be a happy and settled people in this country.
And just to conclude, we can't move forward as a nation until we actually sort out these injustices that occur when we're denying Māori tino rangatira. So we actually can't get anywhere and get to a place where we can do our job properly before we address all of those things. Thank you for hearing us, and we'd love to have some questions now.
All right. Well, I've got time to get them both. We'll go to Tākata Whereas first.
Tēnā korua. Look, I'm going to let Steve go, but I just want to say tēnā koutou. There's honour in tangata tiriti tanga. And I hope that all New Zealanders get to live with that honour at some time. So over to Steve. Tēnā korua.
Good on, Steve.
Kia ora takata. I appreciate that, mate. You say the bill seeks not only to redefine the place of tangata whenua, but it would also redefine the place of tangata tiriti. Not only did this bill seek to nullify tino rangatiratanga as a recognised right of Māori, not one that they were afforded by te tiriti, but one that was recognised by te tiriti, but it also steals the pathway to constitutional legitimacy for non-Māori and tangata tiriti. And so how does that make you feel as somebody who wants to, as an organisation and people who want to uphold the constitutional foundation of our nation that has a legitimacy in te tiriti? Otherwise, it is merely a nationhood based on conventional colonisation.
Yeah, I think the bill needs to be recognised as a colonial act, and therefore in many ways a violent act. This bill would make us into conquerors rather than partners, and we genuinely value partnership. It's really important to our sense of identity. I think that we're speaking on behalf of our whole caucus and our whole law centre, and I'm sure that they would all be happy with that statement.
And on a personal level, it's hurtful to have that opportunity to be genuine partners, have that relationship, be moving forward into the future where we can uphold our constitutional obligations, having that be attacked. Yeah, it doesn't give us the stability, it doesn't give us our place to stay here. So we find it on a personal level as well harmful.
I think there's been a lot of talk about this being some sort of expression of liberal democracy. I don't think it's liberal, and I don't think it's democratic. And I don't think there's another country in the world we can look to be a good example of how to be a bicultural nation. We are the benchmark. We're the visionaries. I think we need to be a leading light for the world in that regard.
Thank you for that. Thanks for your submission and your excellent written submission as well. So thanks very much to the community law centres. Members, our next submitter is Te Wangana Aotearoa Ana Wanawa. And if we've got those, and I see we've got Hilda online there. Kia ora, Hilda.
Ai, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa I tēnei ata. Tuatahi mihi atu ki ngā tini mate kia Tariana Tūria, kia Irirangi Tāwhawhirangi, kia Matua Bom Gillies, te maha o ngā tangata kua hinga I tērā tau, me tēnei tau. Whakaroa I tēnei wā mo ngā kaumātua kui o ngā tamatua o muri whenua, o ngā puhi, o Ngāti Whātua, o te ao whānui, I whawhai mo te whakanui te titi o Waitangi. Yeah, kia ora. Nice to be here. Not really, but anyhow, I can hear my mother-in-law in words in my ear saying, we honour the treaty and the mana of Ngāpuhi. So I have 10 mokopuna and 6 great mokopuna, Māori Pacifica. I am a treaty and action educator and a Māori ward councillor. I understand the responsibilities expected of decision-making in a local government setting. So kia kaha koutou. My friends and I have been saying the same thing for the last 55 years. We just want to be Māori in our daily lives. We can interact in the wider world with many people and cultures. We pay taxes, rates, insurances, mortgages, car registrations, and all kinds of other bills. We have raised many tamariki, but we just want to be Māori every day. Our culture is simple and complex, but it's also our strength. Today I represent Te Wānanga o Te Rangi a Niwaniwa, which is a sort of support group for Year 12 and 13 students at our kura in the far north. We provide what we call the Niwa Passport, which prepares our senior students for pre-enrollment into trade courses, jobs, tertiary education. Like, you know, we get them organised to get their driver's licence, first aid, lifeguard training, CV scholarships, and halls of residence applications, etc. So, you know, I've only got about 7 points to make. I hope I make them quickly. I've I've attended Waitangi commemorations since 1978. Media generally define Waitangi Day around reactions to the Crown, but no one actually values the huge input of Māori in our neighbouring communities. Over the last 50 years, there's been a huge shift in awareness about the true significance, meaning and mana of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. There's strong tautoko amongst all of Tai Tokerau, iwi, hapu and Waiara communities to honour our treaty obligations amongst ourselves, whether it be to manaaki manuhiri through pōhiri, tunukai, speaking at political forums, waka praues, signing up people for courses or selling local goods and wares. People underestimate the goodwill from our Tai Tokerau communities, Pākehā, other iwi, Pacifica and Asians. With or without the Crown, it is incumbent on Māori and Tai Tokerau, we will continue to commemorate our treaty obligations. Number 2, this year I attended 6 pōhiri at Waitangi for iwi chairs, for the reopening of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi marae in its 101st year. The Governor-General in her last term, Dame Cindy Kiro, the 50th anniversary of Waitangi Tribunal, the Chief Justice and the local government New Zealand. The 5th one was Te Kuini Nā Waihono i Te Pō, Te Kingitanga, me ngā manuhiri o Te Motu. And the final one I attended was for the Pacific Island delegation. Now, I personally boycotted the pōhiri to the Crown because I'm sorry, I just think that we've wasted too much energy on responding to this treaty principles bill. And I think at my age, I tried to save my energy for useful things. They stripped the Treaty Principles Act and a regulatory bill will deny Māori 20% of the Aotearoa population their rights. What could we possibly say to each other on Waitangi Day and the 185th commemoration of Te Tiriti o Waitangi? Absolutely nothing. So the night before the pōhiri to the Crown, Ngāpuhi Nui Tonu debated whether to welcome the Crown or not. And Ngāpuhi decided one speaker would speak for all of us, all of the northern tribes, Āpirahama Edwards. That was a sign we are not happy with the Crown actions to our treaty. And so the organic action of my sisters, sister cousins from Tai Tokerau and their huri tuara action and their wearable slam art, I tautoko to the max. Number 3, my main criticism of this bill, chairperson, is that the kawanatanga is not showing good government. And so the laws your government is rolling out doesn't give a sense of trust to our younger generation. Do you worry about that? Do you fellas worry about that? If there was a report card, how would your government rank, you know, the cutbacks in health, housing, social services, disability programs, oranga tamariki, school lunches? Your government's policies have actually plunged many into despair. In Muri Whenua, in the far north, there are 2,000 people who are unable to register with a doctor or hauora service. So they go to accident and emergency services at Kaitaia Hospital. We have nursing programs being rolled out in Tai Tokerau. Kawakawa, Whangarei, Hokianga and Kaitaia, all hospitals are understaffed. One of your ministers asked a trainee, why are you training for a nursing degree when there are no jobs? What the heck? They want to save lives. It's up to the government to fund hospitals so that there are jobs for our medical expertise. Our locally trained expertise is now flying across to Australia for better wages. That's very problematic. Although Aotearoa has survived the global COVID epidemic and recent weather disasters, we should be celebrating that. But you know, I see a young mum and I say, take your baby to the hospital. The baby has a croup cough. And she says, oh, I can't get in. Number 4, e ora tonu ana te tiriti. Māori relationships are strategically important. I'm sure you agree. Would your wife, your partner, accept a downgrade in his or her mana? I don't think so. Number 5, William Hobson, for those in Hobson's Pledge who don't know, signed the Māori version of Te Treaty o Waitangi. His mokopuna, the Hobson mokopuna, are based in Ngāti Whātua ki Kaipara and in Ngai Takoto in the far north. They are strong advocates for treaty justice. Hobson's Pledge, can you tell them to stop hating on Māori? Their fake posts are corny, and they will all have Māori mokopuna one day. Maybe they could turn their focus on something more positive like funding hospitals. Sorry, we can't return to the colonial past they crave. So, number 6, 2 more to go after this. The advice we seek, if you want war, more genocide, you follow Trump. If you want financial advice, you seek a trusted financial advisor. If you want medical advice, you would ask a reputable doctor. So please don't ask the ACT Party to translate any part of Te Treaty. They are not real experts, and tino rangatiratanga is not a personal right. So stop corrupting the treaty text. I have a free Māori lesson for you. Taringa kohatu means stone ears. Why do you not heed the largest hikoi of 100,000 people who marched to Parliament? English lesson. Act says Māori have preferential treatment. Yes, we do, but we call it racism. I don't need to tell you the stats. Hawaii ki hau, number 7. If you want to know what young Māori are saying, go to Matatini. Go to Kapahaka regional competitions. Go to Manukorero. There will be commentaries from every region about your treatment of Māori this year. Taiwohi are talking about Hawaii ki hau, the new world they will lead. Listen to their dreams, otherwise they will not include you. Finally, I want 4 painless things, please, from this government. 1, an apology to all Māori.
You've got about half a minute left, Hilda.
I'm winding up. An apology to all Māori and people of Aotearoa for the shameful treatment of Māori in rolling out the Strip the Treaty Bill. You have stolen time from us. We could have used better. Dump this bill in the incinerator where it belongs. Salvage your strategic relationships with iwi and hapu Māori and restore some good governance. Finally, if you need any help, let me know. I'm available, etc. Kia ora rā.
Tēnā koe, kia ora. Thank you for that, Hilda. We haven't got any time for questions. But you've very
I'm glad. Now you know how we feel. Okay.
Kia ora. Look, very impassioned. Thank you very much for your submission. Members, our next submitter is a individual submitter, Bruce McGeechan, and we have him for 5 minutes. Bruce, kia ora, I'm going to hand straight over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, committee members. I'll talk about a bit about the background of my submission, touch on the submission itself, and then leave as much time as I can for questions. I'm on my own personal journey to understand the treaty, including the principles of the treaty. I think the best way to understand any particular topic is not to read or listen to single viewpoints, but engage in a debate where you can get the full complexity of an argument out, the premises, the conclusions of an argument, and really understand what the controversial issue all comes down to. So when in 2023, David Seymour brought up this idea of a principles bill, I thought, great, we'll be able to see this idea be attacked. Those premises might be wrong, the conclusion might not follow the premises. There might be something wrong, sure, that there are different viewpoints on the bill. And yet, there was silence. yes, David Seymour was attacked, but the argument itself, insofar as I could see, wasn't attacked. I tried to work out why there was this silence, and I saw the theory of the spiral of silence as perhaps being an explanation. And as I go into a little bit of length in the written submission, that spiral of silence theory says that people fear social isolation, and that when they state their views, they're worried about those views having a response of scorn. So they go silent. And more people do that, and you get this spiral of silence. For people like me, that just means we go into this cul-de-sac where we can't push forward our understanding of the treaty or the principles in this case. And so when the bill was introduced late last year, it broke that silence. And instead of being in that cul-de-sac, my personal journey entered a highway of 300,000 submissions. So I support the bill on that basis. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thanks for that submission. If no one else, Takata has a question, so we'll go to him.
Hey, kia ora, Aotearoa, thank you for your time. Do you support the bill, or do you support the idea of a nation learning about the history and the document and all of that?
I support New Zealanders, every New Zealander, understanding from different viewpoints through the process of debate the principles of the treaty. And indeed,
the quality of debate, Bruce, is only as good as the information it's based on. So how do we get to that point? Because if you've got people who are ignorant of the history of the facts, then your debate is not a debate.
So Mr. Ferris, I think you're correct. We need to get all the different viewpoints, including the facts, out on the table. And when you have silence, like we saw back in 2023, it just doesn't push that debate forward.
Do you sort of recognise that the Waitangi Tribunal is the holder of the current body of evidence sanctioned by the government and have been doing the work for 50 years? Is that a good source for that information, do you think?
I think they're an excellent first viewpoint, and they were, weren't they, the first viewpoint on the principles way back in 1975. But we need every viewpoint that we can get from around this democracy of ours so that we can understand the complexity of where the principles are at and what the treaty is all about.
Sure, thank you for that. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for those questions, Takata. We'll leave it there. That is 5 minutes. And we'll go to our next submitter, which is the Federation of Business and Professional Women of New Zealand. I see we've got Siobhan coming online. Kia ora, Siobhan. Welcome to the Select Committee. We've set aside 10 minutes to hear from you. So to maximise that, I'm going to hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, you able to hear me okay there?
Yeah.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Siobhan Dilly toku ingoa kei Business and Professional Women New Zealand. Aho I mahi ana. Good morning, I'm Siobhan Dilly. I'm with Business and Professional Women New Zealand. I'm on the National Exec as Vice President Issues, and so I head our advocacy efforts. As a women's advocacy organisation since 1939, we understand how policy making in New Zealand has been and will always continue to be a journey. Through this journey, different groups of New Zealanders have experienced different opportunities and outcomes and still do. In 1840, Te Tiriti o Waitangi embedded a partnership between Māori and the Crown that is a treasure to us as a country. This is our history. The details and the merits are often debated, and the subsequent journey as a country has often been painful, with unequal treatment and outcomes for Māori. However, this is our history. We own it, and we should always do better. Over the last 30 years, we have worked on doing better, and we still have a long way to go. This bill and its proposed principles undermine the foundation of our nation. They go against the principles of tiriti itself, particularly whakawhanaungatanga partnership, that government and Māori should work together. This bill and the rhetoric around the bill has fanned the flames of division. Racism has clearly increased, rather like when sexist and misogynistic attacks online increase when women are appointed to leadership positions. There have been other decisions suggesting a lack of genuine interest in better outcomes for Māori, children, women, and other vulnerable people. These areas, policy-making areas, include progress on fair pay agreements and income insurance legislation, both of which being withdrawn, reversal of the extension of 20 hours early childhood education subsidy to under 2-year-olds, social welfare changes which negatively impact women and children, access to school transportation, access to services for differently abled, and funding for NGOs providing vital social services. As a women's advocacy organisation, we want to see evidence-based decision-making which addresses situations and policies where women do not achieve the same outcomes as men. This is reflected when we seek better outcomes for Māori wahine who experience further disproportionate inequalities, particularly health, justice and employment. In our submission on the Regulatory Standards Bill, we said we believe the parliamentary processes and legislation should empower women by removing barriers to that empowerment. Equity is an important step towards fairness. However, substantive equality ensures that fairness is fully realised by all. Yes, we need to transform systems and structures, but, and this is a big but, Te Tiriti o Waitangi does not need fiddling with. It just needs honouring. Ngā mihi, are there any questions?
Kia ora, Siobhan, thank you for that. Steve Abel has a question.
Yeah, kia ora, Siobhan. This concept that you speak to about behind the bill is everyone is equal before the law does not respect that we do not all have equitable opportunities and outcomes, as you put it. Can you expand the sort of intersectional layers of unequal starting point that we have with your experience of and particularly your engagement with Māori and business and professional?
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, that might take me all day though. So because of course the intersectional differing outcomes is embedded in systems and structures and societal beliefs and norms.
Yes.
But one of our major policy areas is the gender pay gap, and looking at that at an intersectional level, you know, we're just reviewing the gender pay gap as it currently is, where Pacifica women have a 24% pay gap against Pākehā men. So women themselves have, depending which way you calculate it, an 8.2% pay gap. So when you're absolutely right, we are all equal as humans. We do not all experience equal opportunities, and we certainly don't experience equal outcomes. Thank you.
Yeah, so that idea that somehow the privilege that's been afforded is to those whose tino rangatiratanga was affirmed by Te Tiriti, whereas what you're saying is that the likely or the perceivable privilege that exists is not that way at all. It's actually a privilege of those who the descendants of the colonizers primarily.
Yeah, I would hesitate to maybe use the word privilege to say this was an agreement between sovereign peoples.
Yes.
So it is you know, a founding document for New Zealand. It is inherent to who we are as a country. It's recognizing sovereign peoples rather than affording extra benefits and special rights. It's more than that. It's bigger than that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh no, it's not my language, obviously. It's the language of the author of the bill.
Yeah.
Cool.
Look, Siobhan, thank you for that. It's a really good submission, and Thank you also for your written submission and interesting description of the work you do in your organisation. So thanks for that as well.
Kia ora.
Members, our next submitter is the Tertiary Education Union, and we have them for 10 minutes. I see we've got Huhana online there.
And the video.
Kia ora, Huhana.
Kia ora.
We
Now
we can't see you yet. But that's
right.
all right.
It won't come off. There we
There
are.
you go.
Oh, there we are.
Okay, well, kia ora, Huhana. Welcome to this subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've set aside for the Tertiary Education Union 10 minutes to speak to your submission and answer any questions that we may have. So I'll hand over to you. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou. I just, sorry, Duncan, I just want to know, is Jennifer Haraki online? It was, she's included me with her.
I can't see Jennifer. We're just trying to bring her in now. But it might be useful if you just start the submission if you can, and we'll try and get her online.
Ai. Oh, well, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Huhana wā tēnei tōku ingoa, Te Tumu Whakarai Māori, co-president speaking on behalf of Te Hautu Kahurangi Tertiary Education Union, more commonly known as TEU. We strongly oppose the principles of the Treaty o Waitangi Bill. The principles, in conjunction with the intentional lack of engagement with Māori during the development of the principles, failed to reflect or honour Te Treaty o Waitangi. The entire force behind the bill goes against the whāinga of TEU. We see it as a discriminatory exercise which is explicitly prejudicial to Māori. Despite the ongoing injustices which Māori face, which TEU is committed to addressing, we want to address that and ensure that we've got the interests of societal transformation. This bill will only serve to disadvantage Māori, create social division, and diminish the significance of Te Treaty o Waitangi. And I acknowledge the term Te Treaty o Waitangi, not the Treaty of Waitangi. We recommend that the bill is withdrawn, but if the bill is not withdrawn, we recommend the bill be referred to the Waitangi Tribunal under Section 8.2 of the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975. Ngā mihi to all the whānau who are online, on board, and I can see that Jennifer is online. And I mihi to you too, Jennifer, for allowing me to come and stand beside you, even though we're not in the same room. It's that we're on the same board here. Kia ora, so I'll hand over to you, Jennifer. Ngā mihi.
You're on mute there, Jennifer, so...
I'm just a carpenter, so I apologise for any technicalities whatsoever. You know, so I'm not the most flashiest, but anyway, I've done a summary of our submission, if that's okay. The first one is that we oppose it. The bill represents a deliberate continuation of systematic disposition disguised as democratic reform. It follows a long pattern of legislative actions that have historically eroded Māori rights, autonomy, and the true intent of the Treaty o Waitangi. The Crown has used law as a tool of disposition for nearly 2 centuries, starting with the 1847 Education Act and then 1903 ban of te reo Māori in schools and mass land confiscation in the 19th and 20th century. The 1967 Māori Affairs Amendment Act all reflect a calculated pattern of using legislation to diminish Māori rights while consolidating Crown power. The 2024 bill is no different. It seeks to redefine treaty principles in a way that prioritises non-treaty partners, foreign investors, and Crown control over Māori self-determination. Principle 1, government by the Crown. Principle 1 of the bill establishes the idea that government has the exclusive right to govern New Zealand and make laws for all. However, this interpretation deliberately ignores the guarantees of tino rangatiratanga and treaty. The treaty was not an unconditional surrender of Māori authority. It was an agreement between 2 sovereign parties. This redefinition shifts power entirely to the Crown, removing any recognition of Māori self-governments, which is in a direct violation of the treaty original intent. If implemented, this principle to allow this government to legislate Māori rights out of existence under the guise of democracy. Principle 2, equal rights and duties. Principle 2 claims that all New Zealanders should have the same rights and duties, but this ignores the historical reality of Māori disposition. The Crown has spent nearly 2 centuries systematically removing Māori land, language and sovereignty through legislation from 1847 Education Act to the 1967 Māori Affairs Amendment Act. This principle erases the fact that Māori entered into Te Reti as a distinct political entity with their own authority. True equality cannot exist when one party has the power to unilaterally redefine the treaty and ignore its obligations. This principle is not about fairness. It is about erasing the status of Māori as treaty partners and reducing Māori to mere stakeholders in their own land. Principle 3, reasonable cooperation. Principle 3 redefines the relationship between Māori and the Crown as one of reasonable cooperation, but this conveniently removes the Crown's duty to actively uphold and honour treaty obligations. The treaty was signed not as a vague agreement to cooperate, but as a formal contract guaranteeing Māori authority over our land, resources and governance. The shift in language from treaty obligations to general cooperation opens the door for this government in bad faith while claiming to be meeting its duties. The principle reframes Māori as just another interest group rather than a treaty partner. It allows this government to sideline Māori concerns and justify this government's policies that favour non-treaty parties, foreign investors and Crown interests over tangata whenua. The bill is not a step towards fairness. It is a step towards continued disempowerment of Māori. It follows a well-documented pattern of using legislation to justify systematic disposition, prioritising Crown control and foreign interests over the rights of tangata whenua. Each of the 3 principles outlined in this bill redefines the treaty in a way that strips Māori of their historical and legal standing as treaty partners. If passed, this bill will have devastating long-term consequences, allowing the government to further erode Māori sovereignty while claiming to promote democracy and fairness. I hope the Select Committee to reject the bill in its entirety. True justice requires honouring the original intent of Te Reti o Waitangi, not redefining it to serve political convenience. This is not democracy. This is systematic disposition by legislation. The principles of the Treaty o Waitangi Bill should be withdrawn in full.
Kia ora, Jennifer. You're quite some carpenter. Thank you.
My predecessors wouldn't think so, but yeah.
Kia ora for that. Look, members, Steve Abel has a question, so let's go to him.
Yeah, I kind of I really appreciate the submission, and I want to kind of get to a bit to the essence of what Te Tiriti embodies as a concept for our nationhood. Like, it seems to me to be fundamentally about relationship, and you don't uphold a relationship by negating the original agreement on which it's founded. How would you respond to the impact on our kind of national cohesion, you know, when we're kind of, it feels like we're doing this over that founding agreement?
I put it in a way that I understand. When you we won't talk about housing because that's a different subject, but anyway, when you're looking at who the client is in a contract concept, right? There's a relationship regardless. As the original, say for a main contractor and a subcontractor. So I've contracted to Kalma, and then Kalma is the main contractor, right?
Yeah.
So if we do not meet the terms of the original contract, we as the subcontractor would be deemed gone. So the Treaty of Waitangi isn't a document that there's a word, sorry, I'm not flash on words, but there's it is our founding document, but it's also the way we have grown up with. I don't know if that's the right word for it.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Stephen, I don't know if it makes any sense, but it might be in my own head. To understand, I think someone else said it too as well, the actual reason why we are who we are is not something to just make it frivolous or anything like that. So the relationship I believe you're talking about is going back and honouring the kaumatas, the queers, and all that back then is their true intention to ensure that we move forward and progress. But the actual essence of how they were back in the day, the kaumatas and the queers, that even the ones who didn't sign, but the actual intent of what it's supposed to be is to bring two different parties from two different backgrounds and everything like that, and understand that the party that's coming in is supposed to not only work with the existing party, which is tangata whenua, and make sure that we go together. That togetherness hasn't happened. So in the meantime, the true essence of what the people back in the day wanted for us in the future, and then even us moving forward forward for it hasn't gone through. It's been systematic. It's been stopped to only benefit one. Whereas the ideals of say myself, right, or I'd say for myself growing up, right, is that we have been deliberately kept back. So that we have, and every time Māori catches up, it gets legislated out, and then we have to start catching up again.
Hey, Jennifer, you're in full flight there, so sorry for interrupting you, but we're actually well out of time, so we're going to have to stop you there. Kia ora for that really impassioned submission. Awesome.
Sorry, Stephen, that didn't answer your question.
It's very good. No, it's perfect.
Thank you. Members, we have a series of individual submitters coming up, and they'll be 5 minutes each. The first one is Barbara Smith, who I can see is online now.
Right.
Kia ora, Barbara. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 5 minutes. In the interest of time, I'm just going to hand straight over to you to speak to your submission and answer any questions. Kia ora.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for hearing my submission. I support the Treaty Principles Bill. My concern if the bill is not passed into law is the damage it would have on my family and many other families like mine into the future. My immediate family is made up of various ethnicities. My children have Scottish, English, Irish, European, Pacifica, and South American heritage. One of my children is married to a woman of Scottish, English, European, and Māori heritage. My grandchildren and great-grandchildren are a mix of many ethnicities, including Māori. Unless the Treaty Principles Bill is enacted into law, numerous families like mine will have family members treated differently depending on their ancestry. Te Pāta Māori and others will divide my family into two fundamentally different groups, tangata reti and tangata whenua. Yet they are all my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all part of me. For example, the impact on my family is that the children of my son and daughter-in-law, who have Māori ancestry, will have different rights to those of the child of my other son. Two of my great-grandchildren from my daughter have Māori ancestry, but the third does not. This means some of my great-grandchildren will have different rights from their cousins. By dividing families in this way, such racial division will cause damage to the very foundation of our society, the family. The Treaty Principles Bill ensures that families like mine throughout New Zealand will be treated equally because each family member is regarded as a universal and equal human being. I wonder how many of you and those watching are also worried for the future of their families. What will I say to my granddaughter who has no Māori ancestry when she asks why is she not as important as her cousins with Māori ancestry? In the past 30 years or so, I have noticed the division is getting worse. I can say that from personal and professional experiences. I'll give you a personal example. When I started my nursing training in the 1990s, I had a Māori surname. One day, I was told there were scholarships available for Māori students that would pay for my training. When I said I did not have Māori ancestry, I was told I wasn't eligible. The funding was for Māori students only. When my son...
I just note, Barbara, we've got a couple of questions if you want to answer them, or you can just keep on with your...
I'd like to finish.
Okay.
Thank you. When my son went to university, he was offered a scholarship to pay for his studies, but was also turned down when he said he wasn't Māori. He just happened to have a Māori surname. We had to get a student loan and had to pay it back. However, his children would be eligible for the loan. The Treaty Principles Bill helps to clarify that despite their ancestral heritage, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all my descendants, and others like us, are all New Zealanders and would be treated fairly and equally and not divided into two different groups. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
We've got a very brief time for questions. Tākata.
Kia ora, Barbara. Hey, I just want to say to you, Barbara, that you need not fear, and that the Treaty of Waitangi is actually the great unifier of all peoples, because it affords every single person in the country the same constitutional right to be here. So despite what you may have heard or may hear going forward, a lot of that is misinformation, and the treaty affords everyone the same constitutional legitimacy. So kia ora.
All right, thanks for that. We generally aim for questions, but we'll move on to our next submitter, who's also for 5 minutes, and it's Cohasset Group. And I see we've got Craig Nisbet to speak to this. Kia ora, Craig. Welcome to this subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 5 minutes. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Well, yeah, thank you for the opportunity, pardon me, to speak. I'm grateful for it. I'm a director of several companies engaged in the variety of activities within construction and property development sectors. A lot of those projects are undertaken up on the East Coast, which is, for me, largely home. Projects undertaken by these companies and by friends and associates have experienced difficulties as a result of the conduct of a minority, and I stress a minority, of people who have hijacked the treaty and rules which have evolved from it, solely for the purpose of delaying the project and or imposing unnecessary costs on its owners. Incidentally, I do support the bill. So it may be the case that the treaty did not provide a legitimate platform for such destructive behaviour by the strong and vocal minority. It may even indeed be unfair to blame the treaty. It may be entirely legitimate to blame only the minority of troublemakers whom successfully hijacked the treaty. But this, however, is the reason a very honest and public debate triggered by the Treaty Principles Bill is urgently required, because it is becoming increasingly unclear what rules and practices are supported by the treaty. Hence the frustration I and many are currently feeling. The questions are, what is wrong with public debate? Why are those supporting the bill called racist? I'm certainly confident that all my Māori friends on the East Coast, many of whom support the bill, would vigorously defend me if I too were publicly labelled racist as a result of participating in the submission process and supporting the bill. There is nothing racist inherent in expecting the rule of law and honest business practice and common decency to be practiced irrespective of race. It may even be the case that the person behaving wrongly can legitimately be labelled racist for leveraging the treaty to impose a position of privilege to the extent that harm or loss can be caused to others. I offered two of many examples I have first-hand knowledge of misconduct practiced by parties referencing the treaty which unnecessarily delay projects causing significant additional cost. One project, by way of a delightful, harmonious process involving local iwi, and I stress that, it was enjoyable, memorialised wāhi tapu sites that identified by iwi. The memorialisation followed a period of extensive consultation with tangata whenua, again, harmonious without friction at all, and the commissioning of a comprehensive cultural survey funded by the developer. The project was a demonstrable recipe in harmony between iwi and non-iwi, between locals and a developer. However, at its final stages, the project was nearly derailed by a handful of radical, disaffected, ill-informed Māori whom, without any supporting evidence whatsoever, argued that the access road to the project interfered with wāhi tapu sites. Therefore, it couldn't be completed. Eventually, the road was completed after a considerably costly delay. My point here is that these radical few argued that their destructive behaviour was supported by, empowered by the treaty. My argument, it wasn't. In another instance, the developer was required by the local council to commission and fund a report addressing the effects on the project on tangata whenua. This report was required by council despite the subject project being compliant with the district plan in every respect, and thus qualifying for resource consent on a non-notified basis. The developer paid the considerable sum to the writer of the report. The subject report contained many references to the treaty and many frivolous accusations of breach of the treaty by the developer, notwithstanding the extensive, largely voluntary consultation process adopted by the developer and despite its fully compliant status. You're about to say something.
We've got less than a minute left. Would you like to answer a question from Takata?
Sure. Yep.
Kia ora, Craig.
Sure.
Hey, I get your point, you know, that there needs to be development and all of that, and the process needs to be ideal for everyone. And everyone wants development, Māori included. Do you think the debate around the treaty should really be focused around how it impacts or otherwise developments? Or is it something more important, like higher up the chain than that?
I think that we're hamstringing this country at the moment in the development sphere, including in relation to many social housing projects, particularly rural, which is one of my focuses, which helps everyone, iwi and non-iwi, by the treaty. And I think that the Resource Management Act reform being undertaken, I'm digressing, will to some extent address that, but it won't address it optimally if it still refers to the treaty.
What do you think then, like the root cause isn't resource management, right?
We're really out of time, so we'll leave it there. But Craig, thanks for your submission, and we're going to move on.
Thanks, Takuta. Thank you.
Our next submitter is actually Te Kahangarao National Trust, and that is for 10 minutes. So we'll go straight there. Members, it's going to be in Te Reo, so you might want to switch translation on. Kia ora, Daniel. We've got you here for 10 minutes, including any questions. In the interest of time, I'll hand straight over to you.
Oh, tēnā koe, Duncan, i o mihi mai. Kaua ki aua nake, engari ki te whānuitanga o te kaupapa o te kōhanga reo. E whārau toru te kau ngā kōhanga reo, iwa mano mokopuna, e mātaki mai ana i o rātou kōhanga maha, nei kua tae mai ki a koutou te komiti. Nā taku mana wanui ki te tiriti o Waitangi i tuhia ki ngā reo e rua, ka tuku tēnei tāpaitanga ki a koutou i roto i aua reo e rua. Engari i mua i taku kuhu, me whai whakaro a hau ki aku mate, I ngā wiki tata nei, ko te amo kapua o te kaupapa, o te kōhanga reo, ko kahurangi, iri tana tāwhiwhirangi kāriro. O tira ko taku hea mana takirua, ko te whiororangi kōtua tērā, ka riro. Waihoki, ko taku hea mana takirua ōmua, kahurangi tari ana tūria, kua I ka huirua I tana mokopuna ka riro. E te komiti ko enei mate ka hono ki o koutou mate e ea ai o tātou mate. Kia o ki. Kia huri au ki te kaupapa o te rā. Kia ora, my name's Daniel Proctor. I chair the Kohanga Reo National Trust. I'm a proud product of the movement. I take my submission as read and wish to thank you for the opportunity to reinforce some of the points made in my submission orally. We believe Te Kohanga Reo, the proposed principles bill, e te committee, is a complete and utter irreversible failure. It willfully fails to provide assurances to tangata whenua that the Crown will act in the best interest of tangata whenua and tangata tiriti alike. Instead, it risks permanently altering the treaty relationship by granting absolute authority to a sole partner. This bill would adversely affect the status of te reo Māori and the rights of mokopuna as carriers of that cultural treasure. By way of observation, not only does this reckless bill continue to reinforce false assumptions that I've heard all morning, but also seeks to further entrench the damaging doctrine of discovery narrative that's been espoused. This brings me to the principles described in the bill. Principle 1, the proposed bill claims that the Crown holds absolute power. This is wrong. This bears no resemblance to Article 1, as this description of Principle 1 wrongfully gives the Crown a unitary form of sovereignty, thus disregarding the separate pre-existing authority recognised for Māori in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Principle 2 is also wrong as it implies that tino rangatiratanga is subject to and derived from kāwanatanga. It is not. This Principle 2 definition wrongfully reinforces the assumption of the absolute Crown power over everyone, which is inconsistent with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Principle 3 says that everyone is equal and is entitled to equal rights without discrimination. But these nice words don't change the fact, te hoa mā, that the Crown does not treat everyone as equal. Te Kohanga Reo continues to encounter barriers to equality, such as equal recognition of pedagogy, equal provision of resources, equal say and recognition of our role in influencing the design of pertinent education policy. Again and again, the Crown consistently makes and enforces policy that discriminates against Te Kohanga Reo, as summarised in our report Y2336 Mātua Rautia Te Kohanga Reo claim. Hua noe hoa mā, despite these challenges, I must stress that Te Kohanga Reo is a proud movement which has and continues to produce pretty amazing results. Graduates number some 50,000. They call themselves the Kohanga Reo generation. You may have met a few recently. There are more coming. We have arrived at hoa mā. The time of the doctrine of discovery, in our opinion, it's over. You see, before the Second World War, most Māori spoke Māori in their homes. It was their first language. They were native speakers. Sadly, that's changed. At that time, each home was an expression of pre-existing tino rangatiratanga. However, through policy of the day, Māori urbanised, and speaking Māori became pretty out of vogue. Many Māori themselves questioned its relevance in a Pākehā-dominated world where most Māori saw the important goal being to get ahead as an individual. The Māori language was suppressed in schools, as has been spoken to, formally through legislation and informally through the interpretation of that legislation, which gave further effect to Māori being assimilated into Western culture. These actions flew in the face of the protective conditions in Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This proposed bill seeks to continue that shameful colonial legacy of assimilation. For over 40 years, Te Kohanga Reo has been a steadfast advocate for empowering whānau to empower themselves to better outcomes. This approach has played a pivotal role in revitalising te reo Māori and enabling whānau to reclaim rangatiratanga, to live their lives as Māori. Without trying to sound too dramatic, e hoama, Te Kohanga Reo believes that this bill is a waste of time, energy, and taxpayers' dollars. We should not waste any more of anything on this absurdity. It should be abandoned. We should work towards building a nation. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, thank you for that submission. We've got some time for questions if members have questions. Steve Abel.
Kia ora, thank you very much for your submission. One thing that I think is misunderstood is that the efforts to address the imbalances and the structural attacks on te reo Māori and cultural form require us to focus energy and support the efforts of people like your institutions like your own to reinstate and grow that the strength of te reo again, and kohanga reo is a essential pathway to that. And yet people in the tangata tiriti side feel threatened by that. They somehow think that's an effort to address an inequality is seen as a threat to equality. And for me, it feels like a nonsense. I wonder how you respond to that in terms of the sense of a desire to have a, move together as a nation.
Thank you for your question, Steve. The simple answer is the past 50 years can provide us with a framework towards building a nation. To understand the Māori Renaissance needs to understand that equality of opportunity for Māori is the opportunity to unshackle and unbridle some of those regulatory issues that we have in the system, but also to take away barriers towards living a life as Māori and succeeding as Māori. Being bilingual and bicultural in this country today is a real bonus, not only for society, but economically as a nation. We have the term, internationally hot, locally not so much, but that's changing. And that will continue to change as we grow as a nation.
I'm going to just go straight to Takata, who also has a question that we're trying to squeeze in.
Tēnā koe rāniera, i o mihi. You touched briefly, bro, on the sort of the decline of the reo and the post-war circumstances we lived in, which slotted us into a rung in society. Maybe you can speak to us about the aspiration of Te Kohanga Reo and where it, the rebuild of that.
Well, Te Kohanga Reo, it embraces whānau. We lost touch with each other. When we urbanised, we were pepper-potted across different communities. Homogenisation happened. And so Kohanga Reo allowed us to come together and build together. And so it allows each whānau, each Kohanga Reo to practice autonomy, set some goals, and keep each other accountable. It's a really important aspect of Te Ao Māori that we're accountable to whakapapa, whenua, and our whānau, our mokopuna. Those key pillars of our cultural makeup are the fabric that I believe Māori need to continue to re-entrench into their daily lives as a ritual of practice towards oranga for all of our whānau.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Daniel. We're pretty much out of time, so we'll leave it there. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou.
Members, our next submitter is Ron Segal, who we have for 5 minutes. Got it on. I can see you're online. Great camera and
my fault.
We can hear and see you. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 5 minutes. In the interest of time, I'll hand straight to you to talk to your submission and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. There's some 30 to 40 pieces of New Zealand legislation cite treaty principles without actually defining them. These undefined principles appear in everything from the Resource Management Act to the Conservation Act. This unprecedented undersight, in what other area of such constitutional import do we leave fundamental concepts so starkly undefined, has been expertly leveraged by those seeking to effectively rewrite the treaty. Some justify this through microscopic analysis of the bilingual treaty as if it were a precise legal document, scrutinizing exact word choices and translations, which I suggest is imposing a modern legal framework onto what was essentially a diplomatic political agreement made in a very different context, informed by British rule of law at the time, with its essence being conveyed through the conversations and debates that surrounded its signing in 1840. Take the Waitangi Tribunal's treaty principles, which have performed quite the magical transformation, turning civil protection applicable to all Crown subjects into active protection specifically for Maori interests, whilst the Tribunal's principle of equity has somehow shifted the goalposts from equality of opportunity into equality of outcomes. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Maori Party strongly advocates for a partnership principle where a relationship of good faith to progress the treaty's intent somehow transforms into joint title to New Zealand Limited. These and similar creative interpretations have become so deeply embedded that they're now influencing government policies, or say governance policies, like dripping water erodes stonework, quietly, although sometimes not so quietly, but in any case persistently undermining democratic principles through race-based preferences. Given all this, you really have two options: either define these principles properly or remove them from legislation entirely, or preferably both, because the existence of a set of principles fills a vacuum that might otherwise beg to be filled once again down the track. So if we accept that a definition of treaty principles is needed, the question becomes, what should it look like and whether what's being proposed is reasonable? The Treaty Principles Bill essentially does something rather clever, where the treaty is the principles and the principles are the treaty in modern wording, thereby solving the definition problem whilst avoiding controversial change, or so one would think. Now, look, I won't torture you with another recitation of the proposed principles, but I do have a concern with Principle 2. You see, Sentence 2 of Principle 2 rather wanders away from the treaty itself, which conferred no different rights than anybody else other than bestowing restricted title to land lived and worked on, relevant only to Maori tribes. As a treaty principle, there should be no need to cite potential for any other different rights, regardless of which act is trying to sneak them through the back door. Despite this imperfection, and let's be honest, perfect legislation ranks right up there with politicians refusing a photo opportunity, this bill does something crucial. It provides much needed containment of a legislative loose cannon that's been increasingly undermining our democratic unity. Therefore, I encourage the committee to recommend advancing the bill to a referendum. After all, if we're going to have principles, we might as well know what they are. Thank you.
Taka, do we have time for a question if you're really quick?
Certainly, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go to Steve.
Steve, go on then.
Cheers, Taka. I owe you a couple for this. You agree that we can't decide history or facts by referendum, I presume. And can you explain why it would be a problem to decide rights by referendum?
A problem to decide rights by referendum. I think the main point is that these principles are so important that there should be really, it's not a subject for unilateral decision, and going out to the people of New Zealand makes sense to me.
All right.
So rather than Parliament just deciding these are the principles, it makes sense in this case to go to the people of New Zealand.
But we have a human rights
Steve,
bill.
we haven't got time. Steve, we haven't got time for a supplementary. Ron, thank you for your submission.
Okay.
We're well out of time.
All right.
Our next submitter is Steve Raffle, who should be online, I believe. Just coming through now, I'm informed. All right. You can see he's online with us now. Kia ora, Steve. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've set aside 5 minutes for your submission, including any questions. And so I'm going to hand over to you straight away. Kia ora.
Good morning. And what better day than Valentine's Day to share with you my love letter to ideas that work. In 1840, Maori had been in contact for 2 generations with a society based on ideas that work. They had seen the advantages firsthand of those ideas that work. And many had travelled around the world and seen these ideas at work. Ideas that work, like representative democracy with one person, one equal vote, as opposed to tribalism. Although the Westminster system then was not fully representative, it contained within it the seeds that would lead to today's representative democracy that you find people all participate in. Ideas that work, like the scientific method, as opposed to unfalsifiable Indigenous beliefs. Ideas that work, like defined, legally protected, tradable property rights, where resources can flow to their most productive use, as opposed to resources only being available to those who can seize and protect them by force. Maori agreed to a document based on those ideas that work. Yet for the last 50 years, we've been told that it's something else entirely, a partnership, a word that does not appear in the document. In both languages' version, the preamble in Article 1, sovereignty is clearly ceded, and in Article 3, equality of citizenship is promised. All of this comes down to Article 2. Does tino rangatiratanga mean sovereignty for iwi, thereby setting up a system where your rights are determined by your ancestry? Or does it mean iwi are guaranteed property rights over their lands, villages, and other treasures? The only interpretation that makes any sense whatsoever is one that's consistent with the rest of the document. The partnership interpretation makes the whole document completely incoherent. You have to believe that the British Empire entered into a partnership with iwi, promising them all the rights and privileges of British subjects without acquiring the sovereignty needed to uphold those rights. On the other hand, the property rights interpretation of Article 2 that this bill seeks to enshrine as a principle is completely consistent with the rest of the document. The claim is made that the treaty hasn't been honoured because of differences in socio-economic outcomes between Maori and non-Maori. However, the treaty makes no mention of equality of outcomes, and neither side would have expected that. Both sides came from hierarchical societies, and it's up to each individual then and now to make the best of opportunities based on ideas that work. Now, very few alive today have actually had to defend our free land. Fewer New Zealanders have died in war in the last 80 years than died in some of the worst days of previous wars. That's the benefit of ideas that work.
Steve, I've got questions. Would you like to go to questions?
I'll just crack on, thanks. However, this unprecedented peace and relative prosperity is not guaranteed. Ideas that work must be continually reasserted and redefended. It's claimed that the government should have consulted first with Maori. However, that's been happening for the last 50 years behind closed doors. It is now clear that at no time would the supporters of partnership ever invite ordinary citizens to participate equally in this process. opposition MPs now openly reject the principle of one person, one equal vote. To National and New Zealand First, I urge your parties to reconsider your stance, to allow all New Zealanders to have a say in whether this bill is passed into law is not only morally right, it is smart politically. Come next election, when New Zealanders walk into that polling booth to reaffirm, as Labour's constitution said, that all political power comes from the people, how sympathetic will they be to parties that will not stand against a two-tier society? Don't be like Palmerston North City Council that imposed Maori wards despite 68% of citizens voting against. I urge the Parliament votes for this bill to be sent to referendum, because ultimately, where does all political power come from? Hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. It is people.
All right, thank you very much. We're right out of time. Unfortunately, I'm sure there would have been some good questions there, but we can't go to them. Thanks for your submission, Steve. Members, our next submitter is Brent Barrett for 5 minutes, and we'll go straight to him. I see he is online. Kia ora, Brent. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 5 minutes, and so in the interest of time, I'm handing straight to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. I had understood I had 10, so I'll see what I can do with 5. But thank you to the Honourable Session Chairman.
Sorry, Brent, you're right and I'm wrong. You do have 10 minutes, so go for it.
Great, thank you. And to the members of the Justice Committee for your energy and attention to this. It's really good to see MPs here from much of our nation's political spectrum. There is a certain irony that those that demanded the bill seem to have gotten away with leaving the mahi to you. But I do appreciate your presence and your focus. And yes, you will have time for questions. First, a bit of reflection. Today is the 14th of February, a day more than any other in which we celebrate partnership, connection, and love. And I will speak of love, perhaps in a legislative context, in the spirit of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This should be the foundation of our nation's legislative agenda, but in this bill, clearly it is not. Briefly, who am I? A person who's been here by choice for 25 years now, and I will be here in Aotearoa as long as I draw breath. I have quite a range of community involvement, including nearly 9 years as a city councillor in Te Papeoia, Palmerston North. And during that time, I've had many firsthand observations of the way our iwi partners, the Rangatane o Manawatu, go above and beyond, leaning into expanding a constructive and positive relationship with the wider community, with council and the Crown. Now, this submission's in my personal capacity, but it is well informed by that experience. So the basic idea that I'd like to get across is to withdraw the bill in such a way that it is off the political agenda for a very long time. This is the gift to the future that you all, as members of the Justice Committee, can help create through your choices and actions. So if you only hear one thing in the 10 minutes, it's this: the form of the bill's rejection is crucial to the durability of that rejection. Now, perhaps like you, I grew up assuming that some of society's darkest moments, for example, the rise of violent fascism, were lessons learned and not to be repeated. But as we see today, if we aren't careful, history's worst ideas can find their way back into political discourse and threaten all of us. This bill has dangers in it, and it is my sole motivation to provide recommendations that, in my view, improve the chances that this bill goes away forever. So in brief, there's 5 recommendations: to withdraw the bill, issue 3 apologies, and the Prime Minister to make a further public statement. Now, I've only just joined the hearing, so my apology if some of this ground has been trod before, but I'll just try to briefly lay out the rationale around this and then be open for questions. So first, to withdraw the bill, why would we do that? As written, the bill is an exemplar of the illegitimate use of legislative machinery. For a parliament to propose to refashion Te Tiriti, the constitutional foundation of the country, jointly laid down nearly 200 years ago, before Parliament was even a thing, is a gross abuse of power. So I put it to you, and I put it to the government, that the bill is more akin to betrayal and treason than to any legitimate legislative process. Treaties of this nature sit beyond Parliament's reach. I accept that treaties can change, but to attempt to force change unilaterally via Parliament is completely illegitimate, as it seeks to usurp the power of the signatories. And it potentially sets a nation in conflict with itself. So if any part of the treaty is to be revisited, that is a matter for the Crown via the King and Māori together to join in a jointly desired and jointly initiated negotiation. Anything less than that dishonors all. So while I hold concern for the bill's implications on the rights of Indigenous people, it is the blatant misuse of legislative machinery to attack our nationhood that I find most abhorrent. On to the three apologies. First, an apology to all New Zealanders. Probably obvious from the points I just made, but to allow, by free choice, an attack on the most foundational element of our nationhood is wrong, and therefore New Zealanders deserve an apology for that wrong choice. Rather than taking the nation forward, solving the pressing issues of the day, the coalition agreement has needlessly frayed our social fabric and forced every New Zealander onto a slippery slope. In my view, Te Tiriti is our superpower. It's a nationwide treaty with all the First People. It has been our nation's foundation since inception. It has stood the test of time. The judiciary has carefully and effectively interpreted it through the evolution of our nation into a modern, multicultural liberal democracy on a bicultural foundation. Now, few, if any, other nations have such a powerful example of intentional, lasting peace on which to build their nation's future. So simply put, I see this bill as a legislative attack on our nation's heritage, reputation, and future, and as such, upon withdrawal of the bill, an apology to all New Zealanders is in order. The next is an apology to Māori. A treaty of this nature is sacred in blood. Unlike a law, this treaty is a product of two peoples who have conflicted, they have lost treasure, they have spilled each other's blood, but they have finally come to the point of mutual agreement, a mutual agreement that peace, on the terms stated, is the best path forward for all. So that today, one group within one signatory to that treaty should advance a bill as an act of bad faith. And while ultimately it's an attack on both Māori and the Crown, I expect it is most keenly felt by Māori, a stark reminder that some people still choose fear, jealousy, and hatred, rather than peace, connection, and inclusion, to set out the social order. And so to set this right upon withdrawal of the bill, a further apology to Māori is in order. And finally, apology to King Charles. Why? Well, Te Tiriti is the original and strongest constitutional legacy the English monarchy has given our nation. And as I've already noted, it's sacred in blood and lives lost. So for this Parliament to overreach and demean the monarch's legacy with this legislative attack is humiliating to their rule. And so to set this right upon withdrawal of the bill, a further apology to the King is in order. And finally, a statement by the Prime Minister, a statement acknowledging this bill was far too high a price to pay for political power. This recommendation is about authentic political leadership, about building trust with communities, and about being real in real time. Now, nearly all political leaders eventually get to that point where they reflect on the past and acknowledge that they could have done better. That usually happens in an overpriced memoir. But today, the Prime Minister has the chance to do better. While perhaps it was deemed a high but acceptable price in 2023, I firmly believe the Prime Minister and many coalition government MPs now privately believe that enabling this bill was far too high a price to pay. So for the Prime Minister to acknowledge this at the time the bill is withdrawn would demonstrate a capacity for self-reflection that would build his mana, it would build trust with people, and be a powerful example of political leadership. So in closing, I accept that the three apologies and the Prime Minister's statements are things that the committee cannot simply cause to happen. In my view, that makes them even more important than the simple act of withdrawing the bill. So in closing, I ask that all Justice Committee members to do everything in your power to bring all 5 recommendations to fruition and to do all things necessary to ensure that this bill, once withdrawn, remains so forever. Kia ora.
Steve Abel, a question.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Brent. I wonder if you could more broadly reflect on your view of just how a profound and visionary foundational document Te Tiriti is in the context of your original home nation, the United States, where the only mention of Indigenous people in the Declaration of Independence is in pejorative terms. It recognized the equality of all humanity, but that did not include women, Black people, or Indigenous people, and how some many decades later, in 1840, our treaty is founded on a principle of recognizing the sovereignty of the Indigenous people, and what a profound basis that is for a constitutional document.
Thanks for the question. It's as different as night and day, and we can see the results of the sorts of attitudes and consequent actions, playing out in America today, frankly, with some of the conflict that's arising there. So to be in a nation, Aotearoa, New Zealand, that has one comprehensive collective agreement with all First Peoples as a single foundation to build up from and into our future is an extraordinarily powerful position for us to be in as a nation, and one that we should protect at all costs, which is why I'm here.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Brent. Thank you for that. We'll leave it there. Thank you for your submission. Very thoughtful.
Thank you all.
Members, one of our submitters is cancelled, so the next submitter is John Welch. John, I think we can hear you.
Sorry, my name's up, but I can't hear anyone else. They seem to be kind of waiting for me.
Yeah, John, I can hear you, but we can't see you. If you want to switch your camera on.
That's right. I'm muted. It seems to be loading.
All right, John, I'm not sure what's going on there with your video connection.
Sort of says it's joining me up.
Okay, we might have a somewhat slow connection. It might be useful to just switch that camera off and do it.
They're waiting for me to appear. Hello.
Hi, John. Look, I can hear you. We can't see you yet. But
I was only invited to join just a moment before.
Can you hear me, John?
I can see them.
All right, that's not working that well. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next submitter, and we'll try and get John sorted out. So we'll go to Tony Boynton.
Might be because my phone was plugged in. Yeah, it's unplugged.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tony. Good to see you.
Doesn't seem to be working.
Welcome to the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just hand straight over to you, and that time's including any questions.
Kia ora. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou I tēnei wā. He mihi nui aroha ki a koutou mō tō mahi mō tēnei huarahi kino, huarahi hoha, tēnei mahi ingari, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou nā mema o te paremata. Ko au, anei he iti o te kohu o Tamakaimoana me Tūhoi, anei he iti o te waitai o Ngāti Awa, anei he iti o te one o te Rāroa me Ngāti Kahu. Kia ora. So I'm here before you as a small part of Tamakaimoana Tūhoi Ngāti Awa te rarawa in Ngāti Kahu. Ko ai au, ko Tony Boynton, toku ingoa. I'm a Māori ward councillor for Whakatane District Council. Also have done mahi in Māori, advocating for Māori wards. Also a mama of 4 young Māori men, and also a descendant of my Krawarua Kinana. So first off, I do want to acknowledge today, I know I've heard a bit of love around Valentine's Day, but also too, it is the day that Cook died and was killed in Hawaii by probably a tūpuna over there when he tried to take a Hawaiian chief. And unfortunately in that whole thing, he was stabbed and died. So just to acknowledge the death of Captain Cook on this day as well. So to start off, of course, I oppose the Treaty Principles Bill. This bill is divisive. The purpose of this bill and the process serves to divide a nation. It provides to mainstream a false, raceful, hateful narrative while also manufacturing consent to steal the rights, land and resources of not just Māori under Te Tiriti, but of all New Zealanders. We have been directly targeted by this government as part of a calculated legislative attack to remove Māori and Te Tiriti in order to provide a free ride to capitalistic exploitive industries. The Crown has had a long history of committing unspeakable injustices. And as Uri of Ruakinana, we know that because it still remains in our blood today. This bill heralds a new era of injustice, far worse than we have ever seen before. And if it were to pass, we would create another deadly legacy of injustices upon our future generations. This bill is to remove the ability for Māori to act as sovereign people, and in doing so, remove our rights to defend our land, resources, and the environment, not just of our whenua, not just of our communities, but for the benefit of all New Zealand. We are the last post standing to prevent the exploitation of our country's resources. We are on the front line at home and here in these rooms, on these computers, fighting and defending our ability not only to exist, but to ensure that you fellas honour the other side of our agreement that we've had under Te Tiriti. Māori have always been the defenders and protectors of our land and resources under the rights of Te Tiriti. We are always thinking of, with what little we are given, with what little that we have, that we look after everyone and everything. This legislation and this bill seeks to erase the recognition of Māori rights altogether, and is not only contrary to the Te Tiriti itself, but also to international standards set out in the United Nations. For our country, Te Tiriti gives us the promise of a fairer and just future based on peace and mutual benefit. It upholds the mana and authority of Māori to have their say in what matters to us all, while always ensuring that benefits are not only for us, but for all New Zealanders and our future generations. I would like to believe that our country has matured over the last 50 years, though there's been so many of our tūpuna, so many of our warriors who have fought hard to ensure that happens. I would like to believe that in a post-treaty settlement era, where all of our tamariki have the knowledge and understanding of the histories of the whenua that they walk on, te kura, that they go and play on with their sports, that they have heard and know those stories, that the names of our tūpuna are common names, that the kōrero or kupu that they use are everyday part of their upbringing and their world. I want to have faith as a nation to hold true to ourselves as we have done in the past, that we have championed the ability of wanting to have fairness and justice. If there is anything we have learnt as Māori and in times like this, is that we will rise and we will rise again and again. We are not going anywhere, and we will keep on fighting bills like this. We will keep up, standing up, and in doing so, we will reinforce the next generation so they realise and know how much we have to lose. I want to ask all of you in this room or in this Zoom as members of Parliament, and particularly those who may support this bill, that in the future, when you look into your Māori mokapuna's eyes, what will you tell them that you did for them at this time when this treaty bill came up? What will you say to them when they ask you, Koro, Nan, what did you do for me when they tried to pass this bill? Kia ora, ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora, Tony. Thank you for that submission. We've got time for questions if there are any. No? Look, great submission. Oh, sorry, Takata, did you have a question? Off you go.
Yep. Kia ora, Duncan. Tēnā koe, Tony, i te whai whakaro o kupu. So the Treaty Principles Bill is drawing out the best and worst of the country.
Aye.
And thankfully, over these hearings, we're seeing that the best is the majority. So maybe I just want to invite you to just talk to us about your aspirations for Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is linked to the aspirations for your mokopuna that you just posed that question. You know, so just talk us in that vein, in the aspirational vein for Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Oh, definitely. I think we have a lot to build on, particularly with Matike Mai, but also to what this has done is, as we do, we always rise and come together. And so for me, there's a great opportunity, even though ko te he tēnei mahi, engari, ka puta mai te whakaro pai, te kaha pai. So even though that there's this thing that has happened, what always does happen is that we all come together to look at what is the best solution. So if that means that we get to look at a conversation where we're present, where we're actually there, in which our rangatahi and all of our people can have that conversation as has been done before, to look at what is it that makes it aspirational for our mokopuna, with our mokopuna there, with our rangatahi there. For me, that would be my aspiration, is that we can return to our whakaro of being fair and just, and that we can speak together and have that respect together to be able to do that. But yes, there'll be so many Māori mokopuna in the future.
Kia ora, Tony.
Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi. We make love, not war. Kia ora.
That's one way to get more mokopuna. Okay, thank you very much. We'd better move on pretty quickly. Members, we're going back to see if we can reconnect with John Welch. So we'll see how we go there. All right, I see one now.
Yeah, okay, they can hear me.
Kia ora, John, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Look, I'm not sure we'll go with video because we had some difficulties before, but we've set aside 5 minutes to hear from you. If you'd like to just start speaking to your submissions, and we'll have any questions at the end.
Yes, I will. I regret the technical glitches, and I'm not quite sure what happened. But thank you, Dr. Duncan. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Thank you for the chance to speak today. I'm an immigrant from England. After the war, Britain was pretty badly hammered, and my parents made the decision to immigrate to a country where they believed we would be safe and could do well. And one of the most important things about their choice of New Zealand was that they believed it was a country where people got along and there was a lot of racial harmony, and we'd have the chance perhaps to move beyond the rigid social structures which were part of England in those days. And I must say, I think it worked in many ways. I went to school with people from all sorts of backgrounds. I have a Maori brother, a foster brother, whāngaid into our family. I have a black African foster daughter. My children, two of my daughters teach te reo Māori for a living, or have done so. I have 3 grandchildren in Māori immersion schooling system. And I remember when I was, it's just told me the camera can't seem to work. I can remember when I was a teacher at Raukamanga School, it's a school in Huntly, Kura Kaupapa Māori for some years. And I felt very privileged. It was a wonderful job, very much enjoyed it. And I remember an old karawa saying to me when I was at Raukamanga, he said, you know, when I was a kid, when I was young, Māori and Pākehā were just like that. And he intertwined his 2 fingers together. And he was born in the 1940s, and that's just how it was when he was growing up. Māori and Pākehā all got along. And I could remember that time myself, even growing up in the 60s and even 70s, when everybody sort of seemed to get along and it didn't matter whether you were Māori or Pākehā. But one day at Raukamanga School, I had an experience which I think rather shocked the people there. We were invited to go and get some free vaccinations at a caravan which was in the school premises. And we all went over to get our free vaccinations, and you had to write down your iwi in a book. And of course, I didn't have an iwi. I'm an immigrant. And so I was denied that vaccination. And that caused great embarrassment and quite some shock for my companions. And then the next day in the staff room, I explained to the staff of about 25 what it's like to actually grow up. Many doors are shut in front of me and in front of my New Zealand-born family because we're deemed to be the wrong race in terms of funding, educational help, healthcare, and so on. I have seen my own New Zealand-born brother as a grown man crying and saying, if we don't belong here, where do we belong? And my next door neighbor was an older man. He said, I fought for this country in the war. Why am I a second-class citizen? And in my experience, I've seen this sort of separatism increase since, I think, the mid-1980s. And I think it's as the treaty has been neglected. When I was a young kid, it was on the wall, the Treaty of Waitangi. We used to talk about it. We were very proud of it. Sir Aparana Ngata was a national hero. But now when I talk to people, many have very fervent views. But when I actually ask them, what does the treaty say? Lots of them don't seem to know. We all agree, toi tu te tiriti. It's almost, some people are saying that we're talking about doing away with the treaty, and no one's suggesting changing the treaty or cancelling it or throwing it away. And we're actually being asked to look at the treaty and to discuss it. And a lot of people are saying that this process of discussing what the treaty says and looking at what it means is very divisive. But in my experience, I've watched growing division over the last many years as I believe the treaty has actually been neglected, as people know less about it, and as it's sort of gone in the cupboard, and so all we hear is the experts talking about it without reading it. It's actually very simple to read. I think it's time to turn back the clock, and I think it's time to listen to Sir Aparana Ngata, who was a great scholar and well-versed both in law and in Māori tikanga. And I think it's time to learn about the Treaty of Waitangi and our history, why the chiefs didn't sign it and why they did. And I would like to see this bill proceed to get a discussion started, which has been stated to be one of its, well, perhaps its main aim. So people will look at the treaty and we can actually talk about what it means. And obviously, if there's a referendum, that's fine. But the main thing to me is to bring it back on the table and get everybody to talk about it. I think that some of the division...
20 seconds left, John.
No, okay. Any questions?
No, look, I don't think we've got any time for questions there, but
okay.
Thank you very much for your submission, and it's good that we could get you in the end. So kia ora, thanks for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Members I think our next submitter is Peter Williams. So we'll go to Peter Williams now, and we have Peter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. My name is Peter Williams. I'm retired from a career in the media industry. I live in central Otago. I speak in support of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, and this is my personal submission. My ancestors arrived in this country in 1848. My great-great-great-grandparents, Robert Stewart and Margaret Smith, came from Glasgow on board the Philip Lang in April of that year, nearly 177 years ago. So my attachment, my heritage, and my love for this country, and especially for the Otago province, is deep-seated. We are a nation of immigrants, like others whose ancestors landed on these shores from far-off places over time. Over time, from the 13th to the 21st century, I know no other nation I could call my home. Yes, a saliva test taken through Ancestry.com says I'm 91% Scottish, but that's patently ridiculous. I should be graded 100% New Zealander, or if you like to be colloquial, a full-blooded Kiwi. I am tangata whenua. This is my land. I'm privileged to share it with more than 5 million other Kiwis. My ancestors were poor. They were crofters, subsistence farmers, forced off the land during the infamous Scottish clearances. They looked for places like New Zealand to escape to start a new life, a life based on freedom and on equality of opportunity. Millions followed in their wake. Yes, there were some people already here, although where I live, not very many. A census taken by Edward Shortland in 1844 suggested just 302 Māori then lived in the southern part of the South Island. But a negotiated treaty was signed to ensure that all residents of this land would live together peacefully as subjects of the Queen of England. Life in this country since the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi has not been perfect, far from it. Like many emerging nations in the years since the Enlightenment, justice, property rights, and the rule of law have not always been followed as they should have been. So the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 put in place a system for reparation for treaty breaches. From the late 18th century, all immigrant groups to this country have mingled and merged, intermarried and interbred. We are a veritable melting pot of peoples. We are all New Zealanders, all Kiwis, all people of this land. The phrase, the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in that 1975 Act and in subsequent legislation has confused and confounded us for 5 decades. Even the late King Tuheitia said of the treaty, there are no principles, only articles. He was right. But if that phrase is to remain, then we the people, the voters, the electors through our parliament must decide what those principles are. On Waitangi Day this year, Ngāi Tahu's Kai Whakahaere Justin Tipa said, quote, the articles of the treaty are clear. The right to govern, protection of tino rangatiratanga, and same rights and duties. He then went on to say, quote, that is our starting point, unquote. Our starting point for what? The articles were what was signed in 1840, that was it, there was no more. Once the treaty was given legislative status in 1975, the words of 1840 should have been applied in a contemporary context. That is, the elected government governs for us all, that we should all have control over our property in accordance with the law, and that we all have the same rights and duties under the law.
Peter,
in that same speech,
Peter,
Mr. Tupa talked of the unique constitutional identities of iwi Māori. I don't know what that means. Does it mean that iwi Māori have more representation on decision-making bodies than non-Māori, like happens with his iwi's appointments to the Canterbury Regional Council? I think that's wrong in a democracy and an insult to the people of Canterbury. How can those of Maori descent have a unique constitutional identity in a land where we are all supposed to have the same rights and duties? A land where a modicum of Maori blood can give some people political and economic advantage over others. It just does not make sense and must not be allowed in a modern New Zealand. That's why I support this bill. We're all New Zealanders, no matter where our ancestors came from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'll go to Takata for a question.
Look, I wonder if you're just clear that it's called the Treaty of Waitangi, not the Democracy of Waitangi. And I think what you've laid out for us is a pretty good demonstration of the problem that the country is grappling with, which is a massive knowledge gap and an absolute need to bring clarity around Te Tiriti o Waitangi to the fore. And much of that work has been done. It doesn't need to be left to people's opinion. So it's all right if you don't have an answer there, Peter. That's kei te pai. Kia ora.
Peter,
I don't get your question, sorry, Mr. Ferris.
Oh, that's okay.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for your submission, Peter. Kia ora. Members, the next submitter is Julian Ihaya Rawiti.
Yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, Julian. Welcome to this Justice Select Committee subcommittee. We've set aside 5 minutes to hear from you, so we'll go straight to you in the interest of time.
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Julian Ihaya. I'm from Ngāti Hine in the Taitokere, and I'm a descendant of Kawati who signed Te Tiriti in 1840, but not on February the 6th, but in May. I think I need to explain that the reason why we have treaty principles is because there's too many differences that cause conflict between Te Tiriti or Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi. And one of those main differences is that in Te Tiriti or Waitangi, which has been clear from a Waitangi Tribunal report that Ngāpuhi never ceded sovereignty. And so to move forward as a country, we came up with treaty principles that sit in the middle that help to grow the relationship between Māori and the Crown. Now, I want to make it clear that my rights in this country are not purely based on my ethnicity, as it always keeps, I keep hearing, but it's based on the fact that my ancestors who were here in 1835, they signed the Declaration of Independence, Te Whakaputanga, and then further on in 1845, reaffirmed those rights in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So I'm going to get straight into it. I fully oppose this bill, and I'll go into Principle 1. So Principle 1 of this bill, it asserts that the executive government of New Zealand holds full power to govern and that the Parliament has the authority to enact laws in the best interests of all citizens. Now, you might not find a problem with that, but as Māori and as myself, I know that can be interpreted and implemented in a different way. And I'll give an example. So however this assertion can be seen, as a guise, you know, and we've had many laws in this country that have been passed by Parliament that only affect Māori. Only affect Māori. In my submission, I've got a list of those, you know, Māori Affairs Act 1953, we've got the Foreshore and Seabed Act, where those acts only affected Māori. Now, one part of that principle is that it totally neglects tino rangatiratanga. And tino rangatiratanga is a key part of, you know, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and you know that means that we have the right to the guarantee to our own taonga and things that we hold dear to ourselves. Now, principle 1 of this bill doesn't recognise any of that, and so you know, and then if we move into the second principle. So this principle kind of contradicts itself because it highlights, you know, the complexities around recognition and protection of Māori rights under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Now, on one hand, the principle asserts that the Crown recognises and will respect and protect the rights that Hapu and Iwi Māori had under the Tiriti Treaty at the time they signed it. Now, this statement suggests that commitment to uphold the historical rights and entitlements of Māori as initially agreed upon in the treaty is static. You know, that the Te Tiriti isn't a living document, whereas I'd argue that it is, and that my ancestors had foresight to sign such a document that will help to protect us moving forward from the settlers. Because you've got to remember, the reason why we reached out to England was because of the settlers that were playing up here, and my ancestors didn't want to deal with it. So they said, haramai te kuini o ingarangi, haramai ki konei, and look after your people. Now, it says that it'll respect the rights of Māori at the time when we sign te tiriti. But then it further goes on to say that the provision will only recognise it if it doesn't affect the rights of everybody else. And then it further says that it'll only be recognised if it's in a treaty settlement. So that, I've got problems with that. And then moving on to the third principle. Now, to say that we all have rights as a Māori equal before the court, I know that that's not true. I know that the Māori can go through the highest courts in this country only to have the law changed to go against them. I know that because of racism and all that kind of stuff, we have disparities in crime, education, social issues, and
you've only got a few seconds left, so you kind of need to wind up. A few concluding.
Yep. So I'll wind up with this: who we were in the past is not as important as who we are today, but who we are today is not as important as who we'll become in the future, and that's something to think about. It's about we're all about building relationships. We're not about disestablishing them, and this is what this bill will do. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Gillian. Thank you for that. Nicely said. We're out of time, so no time for questions, but thanks very much for your submission. Kia ora.
Ka kite.
Members, our next submitter is the Māori Women's Welfare League. We have them for 10 minutes, and I see we've got Adriana online there as a presenter. Kia ora, Adriana. As you probably heard, we've got you for 10 minutes. And I'm going to hand straight to you for your submission and any questions we may have.
Kia ora. Tēnā kātou katoa, ko Ngāti Mini Poto te iwi, ko Aotearoa te marae ko Adriana Astle toko ingoa. So I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Aotearoa Peka of the Māori Women's Welfare League, membership of 23. So this really is grassroots level. So we're one of only 130 branches across New Zealand. So I'm speaking on their behalf, so I hope I do them justice. Māori Women's Welfare League, we advocate for Māori women and their whānau, as well as holding the government to account to uphold the tiriti of Waitangi. We are speaking at the grassroots level. We run an op shop, we fundraise, we sell seafood chowder, have sausage sizzles, and taitoku our community for a variety of needs. And then this bill proposal came along, and it caught our attention. We have to say thank you because it created a really good conversation for us around those in their 60s, 70s and 80s, our members talking about how they were native speakers and then they were not, and are now coming back and feeling good about it. We spoke about my generation, I'm 52, and about how we didn't have it. Any of the te ao Māori, any of learning about our history. We got that back, I feel, with Te Reka Mauroa. I went through 2 years of that program. And as they say, once you learn it, you cannot unlearn it. I feel we were penalised with the cut in funding, but yeah, moving on. So it did galvanise us, and we're very pleased to say we went up to Kirikiriroa, joined the Hekoi. We commented on the beauty of seeing the Kohanga Reo generation taking the lead, so it was beautiful to hear Daniel Proctor speak. We did run a submission session, but the key point that came up is we wanted to get our voice across, but in actual fact, we had to educate ourselves first, and that's really why we opposed the bill and all things related to it. It's because we had to learn what it actually entailed, that we felt the tagline, equality for all, sounds great as a tagline, but when you actually read through it, it's not there. I don't want to speak to the specific details of the bill. There are many other wiser people who have done that already. But from our level there, we really felt we wanted to put across that there needs to be education, education, education. Even from listening this morning, I can hear And I don't mean this with disrespect, because we all come from a place of ignorance until we learn something. But there's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding, and we just have not been educated as to the tiriti in its basic form and the principles that are in place at the moment. Once we have a full education for Māori, and not just Māori but Pākehā as well, then we are able to have an informed conversation about it. We do support equality for all. We do feel this discussion is very helpful. Perhaps we've all gotten complacent about it, and it's good to hear discussion and debate around it. But with equality for all, we have to say we haven't achieved it yet with the original documents, so let's start by addressing that. As long as we address that, then we can have a conversation about what the next steps look like. I'm all for progression and moving forward, but you need to uphold the responsibilities towards the original contract, as you would say, before you push to have a new one in place. So I welcome the debate. As a peka in Aotearoa in King Country, we feel that we have been enlightened and educated, and we're now part of the solution by putting in our submissions and this oral submission. So ngā mihi to you all.
Kia ora, Adriana. Look, I wonder, in terms of the treaty and the obligations that it creates on government, you talked a little bit about some of your kuia losing their language, the reo, and then kind of regaining it. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that happened and what that means?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about their sort of age range, 60s, 70s, 80s, they were in a curriculum, in a schooling system that didn't allow for them to speak Te Reo Māori. So for that generation, unfortunately, they lost it along the way, or it was seen to be something that needed to be, to put it crudely, beaten out of them. Okay. The beautiful thing, I think, is that we've moved on from that. We've seen that it's a beautiful language, that we all benefit from it. And it is wonderful to see that they are guiding the next generation, including myself, because they are teaching me so much, and having a space and a place where they are comfortable speaking Te Reo Māori. So, yeah, that is definitely a bonus for us all.
Kia ora. Well, if we've got no other questions at the moment, but Steve Abel has a question.
Oh, kia ora. Sorry, just had to get my mic on. Yeah, thank you so much for your submission. It just strikes me that it's such recent history. It's my parents' generation. My parents are Pākehā, but it was their generation who wouldn't have been allowed to speak Te Reo at school and did have it beaten out of them, and that's history that's not understood or known, and that is part of the challenge we face. And can you explain why upholding te tiriti and recognizing that the right to self-determination is a thing that belongs to tangata whenua Māori is an important means by which we can assert the right of Māori to reclaim taonga like Te Reo Māori? And without that unique acknowledgement of tēnā rangatiratanga for Māori, it becomes much more difficult for that to be done.
I think in terms of my perspective, somebody said in an earlier submission that overseas we're just held up as well, but here not so much. But it's really beautiful to see that we do have our kaumātuas and kuia who are feeling more comfortable in their Māori skin. I suppose that's the way I could say it, that they are able to speak Te Reo Māori freely when they came from a place where they weren't able to do that. And it's heartening to see that almost the generations are moving together in terms of the kohanga reo coming together. My generation, which is the middle generation, that sort of embracing learning what we didn't know before. But you are right, the history is really very young. You know, my Te Reka Mauroa course took me to Rangarere, took me to Aotearoa, taught me these things that have only happened 150, 60 years ago. And I feel I'm very lucky. I have Pākehā and Māori in me on both sides of the family. We are all learning together and being educated. So yeah, I just think it's having that place and space to be who we want to be. And that's for everybody.
Kia ora, Adriana. Thank you very much for taking the time and for giving that submission. So, ngā mihi, kia ora.
Ngā mihi.
Members, our next submitter is Peter van der Steen, and we have him for 5 minutes. All right, so we've got Peter coming online now. Just get the camera and audio on.
I can turn it on. Hang on a sec. Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can indeed, Peter. Kia ora, this subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got 5 minutes to hear from you, including any questions. I'll hand straight over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, committee, for the opportunity. That's a great privilege to be able to be heard. I'm a naturalised New Zealand citizen, living in New Zealand 43 years now. In my time living in Whangarei, we used to go to the Waitangi Day commemorations many years in a row, and was always a very pleasant experience. And I did this to get a full understanding of the ongoing debates around the treaty and all that. So in this case, I am in favour of the Treaty Principles Bill as it stands, because I believe it doesn't impact on the actual Treaty of Waitangi itself at all. It's more about how the principles are applied to our treaty. And I think that's very much what it is trying to achieve. But look back in 1975, we heard before, it only got partly addressed to satisfy the differences between the two interpretations of the Maori and English translations. So it is also stated at the time that the treaty was all about giving the New Zealand government the right to govern and for Parliament to pass laws, which I think is a logical thing, of course, to do. If you look in today's in the New Zealand Parliament, we have 33 Maori representatives across the 6 parties. So in itself, Maori is relatively well represented across the board. However, there is obviously some minority Maori groups that would argue that and say that they do not recognise the Pāta Māori. Basically states that in Parliament that they do not recognise the Pākehā government, which in itself is quite divisive, and that would not help in making things better. And if the belief is that tino rangatiritanga only means that it's full sovereignty to Māoridom, then that is going to cause a problem, because what is the alternative? Would we have 2 governments and 2 parliaments? That certainly would not be a very positive state of affairs for all people living in New Zealand. So in the tribunal, in the Waitangi Tribunal, obviously they did try to interpret some of those principles. And back in 1985, when it was extended to historical claims and all of those things, which was fair enough. Also need to take in consideration the fact that the original treaty was not signed by quite a number of Northeast chiefs at the time. They refused to sign it, like Tuwharetoa and Te Arawa, Tainui. So a lot of the current leadership of those tribes actually supports some of the treaty itself, because it is quite beneficial to Maori altogether. So it's not all bad news, so to speak, because the treaty itself has only got 3 simple articles, and also the treaty principles bill now, the new one, is also covering that off in the 3 principles. And it doesn't erode the actual original treaty rights to tangata whenua and also tangata tiriti, which I'm part of it if you would like. Although often we are treated as guests rather than part of the tangata tiriti, but that's only my feeling. At the end of the day, Aotearoa Ngāta was very good in that respect in terms of one rule for all. And indeed still allows for exceptions if it is deemed by the treaty of by the Waitangi Tribunal. If actual wrongdoing is proven, that could still be settled and rectified, which is in itself is a great thing. You look around the world now, people in nations and political systems have evolved over times, and we see that very currently in the news in the Middle East and America. And constitutions must be adapted within around those changes. So everybody is treated equally by law. Anything other than that would only create division. And that's been happening quite a bit in the past couple of years. Obviously, New Zealand hasn't got a single document as a constitution. We are very much driven by the statutes and obviously the Treaty of Waitangi, which is another document in common law conventions. That's how New Zealand is governed. If you look back into history, of course, we don't want to get too carried away, but as an example, when the Moriori suffered at the hands of the Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama in 1835, in 1867, it was deemed by the then New Zealand Supreme Court that Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama had rightfully taken the Chathams in 1835 by conquest.
We're pretty much out of time, so if you could just finish with a sentence, that'd be really great.
Yeah, so and that sort of things would not happen these days. So I would be very happy to see us debating the principles on how the treaty is actually applied, not change the treaty. That's not discussed at all. Thank you.
Got it, Peter. Thank you for that. We haven't got any time for questions, so we'll move to our next submitter. But thank you for your submission.
Thank you.
Members, our next submitter is also for 5 minutes, and that is Darren Hawkes. So he's coming into the room now. If he switches the camera and mic on, we'll be away.
Sorry, I'm just struggling with technology here at the moment. Right. I can't get my camera going. Start video. There we go. There we go.
All right, Darren. Kia ora, welcome.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Great. We've got you for 5 minutes. You've kind of introduced yourself in some ways, but we'll launch straight into it. So over to you.
Ko Aotearoa, te whapa, te whakapapa, raranga mai, ko te whenua whakatū, ko te kāinga whakatāne, no autatuhu, hai mātarau pukaha, ko taku Darren, tēnā koutou katoa. A significant divide has grown and continues to grow, fed by the perception of unchecked and ever-growing preference, demands and rules based upon race. The treaty principles is being blamed for the widening divide. However, the divide was already growing and started well before the bill was considered. It is not the bill that has caused the resentment, but it is the pedestal around which opinions and arguments are being developed to identify and clarify the true cause of the division. A perception of preference or favour towards one group over another group is the cause of the division. The perception has strong foundations where there has been wrongs imposed upon all peoples that have been inhabited in this country. The wrongs have been peoples of this country. Human nature is such that we tend to remember and accentuate the bad, yet we forget the good. If there is a preference, perceived or otherwise, where one group can receive more favoured treatment over another based upon their race, religion or affiliations, discontentment will prevail and will grow. The growing divide between Māori and non-Māori is internationally recognised and a significant issue that many countries face both internally and internationally. Therefore, it provides us in New Zealand as an opportunity that we have right now to demonstrate how resolution can be achieved between two disgruntled parties. The intention of the treaty needs to be considered. The treaty was requested by Māori and non-Māori alike to provide consistent protection to all residents of New Zealand. The protection provided by the treaty was as much to protect Māori from Māori as it was for all New Zealanders against foreign invasion. The people are to be treated equally under the governance of a single body. Governance or sovereignty and independence within the same country is a whimsical, idealistic fantasy at best. The practical application of two differing sets of rules that can harmoniously be applied to a society is not practically possible in the real world. New Zealand has grown and developed where all citizens are in a better situation than where they were prior to the treaty. There have been losses and gains along the way, but the life expectancy, prosperity, and well population has benefited. New Zealand needs to consider what is best for New Zealand as a whole from this point in time and on into the future. Preservation of our unique Māori heritage and history is well entrenched and must be maintained. Our culture and germination of harmony through clearer, unambiguous principles, as in the bill, need to be developed. It is currently being reviewed and could be further developed and amended to include such preservations. Segregation or preference of one people over another avoided if our country is to prosper and achieve gains for all citizens equally. All New Zealanders should be equal under a common equivalent law, whether we came here very recently or our relatives have been here for generations. We are all New Zealanders. The governing body that defines the laws of New Zealand is not the courts. The courts apply the law. I support the development of an unambiguous, clear interpretation of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. The Treaty Principles Bill is a step towards doing that, and therefore I support the current bill and fully support its progression. Ngā mihi.
Thank you for that, Darren. We've got a minute left if anyone has a question. No, look, Darren, thanks. You're not our first submitter today, so you'll appreciate we've asked a few questions already. But kia ora, thanks for taking the time to make that submission. Have a great day. Members, the next submitter is the PSA Te Whataora. We have them for 10 minutes and they've indicated they'll be speaking te reo, so you might want to switch translation on. Kia ora, I can see you there, Virgil, and we've got Diana online. We've got you for 10 minutes, and so very happy to hand straight over to you.
Kia ora, just waiting for my two other colleagues.
Yep, we've got Diana there.
Yeah, I'm here.
And there should be Grace.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to hand over to you. We've got 10 minutes, so it'd be great if you kick off.
Kia ora whānau. Look, it's Alan Franks here. I'm going to start with the karakia to demonstrate our relationship with our organisation there that supports Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So let's just be really brief about it. I know that we've got a really short time. So here's our karakia. He hōnora he korore ki te atua, he maunga rongo te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa āmini. The karakia gives grace to creation, and let's have some good effects in our surrounds for today, and let's be positive with one another. So that's me. So we'll just hand over to our next speaker.
Kia ora, Alan. Firstly, thank you for the opening. Kia ora to the Select Committee. My name is Virgil Iraia. I'm the president of the PSA Te Pukenga Here Te Kangamahi. The PSA has been around for 100 years, and I'm here part of the delegation to make this oral submission. So the PSA has 5 sectors. Within the Te Whatuora health sector, we represent 24,000 kaimahi workers. So they work across the multiple roles, including allied health, public health, mental health, and administration. The PSA Te Pukenga Here Te Kangamahi is committed to Te Tiriti as an organisation. One of our strategic goals is that public and community services honour Te Tiriti. And within Te Whatu Ora, healthcare workers have been using our voices to ensure the new organisation honours Te Tiriti. Diana?
Kia ora, thank you, Virgil, and kia ora, members of the Select Committee. I'm Diana Mensah. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm the co-convener of PSA's Te Whatu Ora Health Sector Committee and Vice President of the PSA. As a healthcare worker, I know that Māori face poor health outcomes in this country, and I want my work to help change that. I visit people in their homes to see what they need to stay safe and to maintain their independence in their own environments. I provide things like a ramp, handrails, or equipment. Like other health workers, I hoped that the creation of Te Whatu Ora would mean I was working for an organisation that supported health workers in addressing Māori health inequities by committing to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I still hope that. We're still working for that. But the disestablishment of Te Aka Whai Ora and the current cuts are making things worse. This bill would be a step backwards for health inequity and all the workers who are trying to change the status quo. Inventing new treaty principles that have nothing to do with the text would undermine the legislation that enables workers like me to honour Te Tiriti by fighting for health equity. In health, we know that treating everyone the same creates inequity. I know that when I enter someone's home and work with them and their whānau, I may end up with an entirely different solution based on their needs than I would with someone else with exactly the same condition who may live just next door. As health workers, we need to meet the needs of the whole person we work with. We need the resources to do our work well, to reduce the disparities in health outcomes. We do not need the government intervening with our work for health inequity by trying to change the treaty principles. Alan.
Oh, kia ora, Diana. Thank you very much. I'm sorry my camera's not sort of working very well, but you can still hear my voice. My name's Alan Franks, ko taku ingoa he uru anō no Te Rarawa, so I'm from Te Rarawa. I'm the tuakana for Te Tira Hauora, which is representative of 1,200 kaimahi Māori in Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand. Hey, perhaps we've got less than that now with the job cuts, but hey, we have a friendship, we have a relationship with Diana's group as well, the PSA Health Committee. Hey, yeah, no, our members are all vehemently opposed to Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill, and we oppose it on 3 counts altogether. We feel that tēnei o rangatiratanga will be diminished, so that our Māori will not be able to advocate fully tikanga Māori that supports hauora Māori practices. We also kind of oppose it at number 2. Tēnei o rangatiratanga diminished will disrupt the working relationships to advocate and support the equity that's acknowledged through Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that's around the active partnership and protection. And the 3rd count is the tēnei o rangatiratanga will be diminished and jeopardise progress in the redress of the health inequities for Māori cited in the Simpson report. I think institutional racism is still current, it's still a continued issue, and I think just consider this as an example. Consider that your child has just returned home traumatised from a visit to the dentist. That's nothing unusual, but at this time our dentists have been contracted from overseas to a South Auckland clinic where the hearsay given to them when they're providing services, you don't need to give Māori children anaesthetics because they're tough. Hey, think about that. Think about that there with regard to what we still have to deal with in the service. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kei roto tēnei wā. That's me.
Kia ora, Alan. Just to follow on from that, we know the Select Committee is doing its best and taking the role seriously in terms of hearing oral submissions. So for health workers, it is important that you understand that the work has already gone into moving the healthcare system to where it is today and to move it forward into the future. Don't disrupt that work. Reject the bill.
And just to finish off at this point, kia ora, Virgil. Here's our karakia to finish off our part of it. Whakawāte te no i a mātou. Whakawāte te o te a mātou. Whakawāte te taurekereketangi a mātou, hei maranga ai ki runga. And that's to say, to wipe away all the stuff that's kind of been negative around this bill, wipe away the hearsay and the useless kind of chatter that has gone on with it, and wipe away the things there that's been perpetrated on us there with regard to kind of keeping us in a secondary place there. And it's so that we can all get on with things and rise above kind of the crap that we've had to deal with this bill so far. Kia ora whānau. Any questions?
Kia ora, Alan. I know we've got one from Steve Abel, so we'll go to him first.
Kia ora, thank you so much for your submission and for your work. Can you expand on the idea that treating people the same creates inequality? In the institutional racism that means we have health inequalities, we had a submitter earlier who said that the best predictor of health outcomes is ethnicity. So if you want to deal with the inequality that's systemic, you have to have targeted strategies that take account of those factors. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think kind of when we look at equity there, we've got an example where two people commit the same crime, and one of them happens to be a 10-year-old, and the other one happens to be a 30-year-old. Under the law, do we kind of really treat them exactly the same? No, we don't. We kind of look around for where is the equity around that to kind of really have some justice. That's my example there. That's a really short and simple, sweet one. Yep.
Yeah, and in a sense, this the narrative around this legislation implies that the efforts to actually address the inequality that exists systemically is somehow a creation of inequality, but actually what you've been doing in the health space is to try and address the inequality through targeted strategies that might focus on disproportionate impacts on certain ethnicities.
Well, here's another one then from our point of view there in health there that where I am, somebody there gets a taxi, happens to be non-Māori, gets a taxi to go to a diabetes session, a diabetes clinic. But at the same time, my workmate, her grandfather has to go to the same clinic and he had to catch a taxi. He had to pay for it himself. Now, the service operates a taxi to everybody who goes to the clinic to keep the appointments fresh. This particular kaumata had to pay his own taxi to go to the same service. That's not equity.
No.
That's not equity at all. So this is these are some of the examples. These are some of the examples that are still ongoing.
Kia ora.
Kia ora,
All right.
Steve.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Alan, and thank you also to Virgil and Diana for that submission from the PSA. So thank you for that. Members, our next submitter is Kiriana Wilcox-Taylor. We have Kiriana for 5 minutes. Just waiting for Kiriana to... I see Kiriana's there now. If she can put her audio and camera on. Kia ora, Kiriana. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee Subcommittee. We've got you for 5 minutes. In the interest of time, I'll just hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Okay. Morena tātou. Ko Kiriana Wilcox-Taylor hau, he uri o Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Hine me Ngāti Pro. I'm speaking on behalf of my mother, Hine Tautopi Wilcox, my husband Josh, and my tamariki Pai and Douglas. I'm opposed to this bill, and I support the findings of the Waitangi Tribunal report, Ngā Matapono, as noted in my submission. I mihi to those that have submitted and presented to the Select Committee on this bill. I'm speaking to you today from Tūranganui-a-Kiwa and Gisborne, and incidentally, I've just stepped out of a taumata aroa e hui, where we're discussing the wastewater performance standards that have been developed or are in the process of being developed. I work for iwi, and so the treaty, Te Tiriti, and our settlement gives us the right to kōrero and work with the Crown agencies to help shape policy that impacts on our uri and our place. If we use the 3 Ps, the current well-known principles to assess this particular engagement, as an example, we look at partnership. And what's partnership about? It's about relationships. It's about working together. So I would pose this question. Have we drafted it alongside the Crown? Participation is about the engagement with decision-making. And I would pose this question. Is being invited to a hui to get feedback on an already drafted document, is that partnership? Is that participation? And then protection. So that's about actively promoting Māori interests. And I would be saying here, do these wastewater standards actually protect the interests of Māori or the people we're speaking on behalf of? The chiefs and tribes signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and that guarantees Māori tino rangatiratanga. The English equivalent being sovereignty. Our chiefs wouldn't have given away sovereignty, full stop. And this was backed up by Maui Solomon yesterday, who talked about it being just a fiction. Tākuta noted this morning about 72% of New Zealanders believing that the treaty should be honoured. I believe that this bill doesn't do that. So I'm opposed to this bill because if it's enacted, it will reduce the constitutional status of the treaty and Te Tiriti and remove its effect in law as currently recognised in treaty clauses and limit Māori rights and Crown obligations. It generates confusion and uncertainty. It's a momo time of our time and our taxpayers' money. You know, the focus on this bill derogates and takes precious time away from more pressing kaupapa like te taiao, like housing, education and health. You know, essentially this bill is a rehash of Rodney Hyde's attempt 20 years ago. It was thrown out then as it should be this time around. We didn't ask for the last set of principles and we didn't ask for this set of principles. I was speaking with my workmate Marama Apelu this morning about how to include our rangatahi voices and aspirations in mahi that is missing those voices. The rangatahi she works with are onto it, funny and real. They're trying to live their best lives while facing challenges of everyday life like getting a kai and having somewhere safe to live. This precludes them from participating in things that shape the places they live in, like voting or creation of a planning master plan, which is happening here in Tūranga at the moment. They need a chance to contribute a way that suits them, gives them the opportunity to have a toe in the door. I mean, this says a lot about Bub, Marama, and the work she does, but it also demonstrates the practical side of living and breathing the treaty. We don't need a set of treaty principles to do this because the treaty and its articles provide these protections. I live the treaty, Te Tiriti, in everyday life. I live rangatiratanga and mana motuhake every day. Patawatine this morning described as Māori being Māori or having a Māori worldview. Nā reira, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, Kiriana. You've pretty much got to exactly 5 minutes, so we don't have any time for questions, but thank you for delivering that submission and thank you for your written submission as well. Kia ora. Members, we've got Harvey Morrow for 5 minutes. Harvey's just coming online. Okay, look, I've just been informed we're going to go to Andrew Butler, who we've got for 10 minutes. And Andrew's just there online now.
Hopefully you can see me.
Not yet, Andrew.
Here we go. Now you can see me.
I can indeed. Kia ora, Andrew. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee. We've got you for 10 minutes. I'll hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to make an oral submission to you on this bill. Before I start, can I just check, Duncan and members, that you have a copy of my written submission?
We do.
That's great. Well, then what I'm going to do is just focus on particular parts of the submission, if that's all right. And I want to leave a little bit of time for questions if you've got any for me. So here we go. I'm opposed to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill on the grounds that, first of all, it does not accurately record what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are. Second, it's an attempted rewrite of those principles without saying that that's what it is. Third, the proposed principles stray so far from what can be reasonably considered to be a fair or adequate expression of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi that the statement of principles in the bill is likely to cause confusion among officials, parliamentarians, judges, and members of the public in circumstances where even the bill says clarity, not confusion, is what is called for. Fourthly, the bill is inconsistent with human rights norms. And fifthly, if you just work your way through the bill just as a technical drafting exercise, the way in which the bill is constructed and its wording shows that its terms are contradictory. It actually, just within its own terms, doesn't make sense. Its terms and its structure are constitutionally and legislatively dubious. So, for example, making that real, what it does is it purports to say that previous parliaments that passed legislation with reference to the Treaty of Waitangi principles in them, and will have done so on an understanding of what those principles are that is quite different from the principles as expressed in this bill, the effect of that legislation will be reversed, not by direct consideration of those individual pieces of legislation, but rather by way of this bill, because this bill would override the understanding of what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are on a not only a going forward basis, but also on a looking back basis. And that is constitutionally and legislatively dubious. Many of the provisions of the bill are ambiguous and would require judicial interpretation, which is ironic, bearing in mind one of the purposes of the bill, so it says, is to reduce the room for judicial interpretation. And its purposes could be relatively easily circumvented by the use of alternative legislative phrases, such as, instead of saying, in accordance with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, a phrase such as the underlying values of the Treaty of Waitangi. And that would be a very easy way to get around the way in which the bill tries to set a core notion of what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are. So for all of those reasons, my recommendation is that the bill not proceed. But I've also submitted that the Select Committee should use this bill and the huge response that you have had to it to make a recommendation to the government that it consider the creation of a multi-year constitutional commission, assisted where appropriate through, for example, citizens' assemblies, to provide quality information about the background to the treaty, Te Tiriti, including the background at the time at which it was signed, background as to the subsequent multiple breaches of the treaty, background about the efforts that have been made to try and make up for those breaches, all of which needs to be properly understood so that people have a deep and proper understanding of what it is that the treaty means. And then with a view to producing a set of principles or mechanisms that derive from and give effect to the treaty that reflect a broad societal consensus and that will be constitutionally protected. One of the things I took when I read the bill is that the real underlying rationale of the bill is that there should be a one law for all moniker. And I think one or two of the submitters we've heard from this morning, I think there was a chap called Darren, that seemed to me to be basically what was informing his approach. And I think it's quite important then that the Select Committee, in whatever it reports to Parliament, because there will be a report to Parliament, even though the bill, it's plain, will not go forward, take the opportunity in the Select Committee report to expressly and squarely address this question of equality, because there's quite a lot of lack of understanding around what that principle of equality is and how it works out in a context like this. And in my written submission, I touch on that on page 4 of the submission, paragraph E, where I talk about principle 3. One of the things that's important to remember that the principle of equality before the law requires not only that like cases are treated alike, but that unlike cases are not treated alike. And I've made reference in my submission of paragraph footnote 3 to an article from Alison Quentin Baxter, who refers to the work of Dicey, the Victorian constitutional lawyer who set the principles that the Pākehā system of law works with, and also a reference to a chap called Lord Wright. And the reason I'm making reference to these people is that these are old timers born and making statements of constitutional principle before there was any wokeness around in the world. So there's a lot of depth to be had in looking back and drawing on the principles and the knowledge and understanding of the past, so that any recommendation that this committee might make is not seen to be woke, but rather to be drawing on well-known principles of long standing in the common law. And what was interesting is if you look at footnote 3, what's said by Alison Quentin Baxter is equality before the law does not mean that the same law applies to all. Rather, it means that all are equally subject to the law, though the law to which some are subject may be different from the law to which others are subject, as one commentator has put it, and that commentator was Lord Wright. The law that applies to each of us may sometimes vary depending on who we are, what we do, and where we reside. So we are suffering from an illusion if we think that we have always lived under a system in which the same law applies to everyone in all circumstances. It is more accurate to say that the same law applies or should apply to everyone whose material circumstances are the same. So I think I would recommend strongly to the committee that it take the opportunity of this bill to fairly and squarely address the concerns that are raised by people in relation to this one law for all, because those concerns need to be identified, taken seriously, and met.
Kia ora, Andrew. Look, I'm going to suggest we go to questions now.
Yep.
Now, the discussion we've just had, or that you've just said, is largely around rule of law, but in your opening, you talked about it being in breach of human rights, and I know your expertise in this area, and I wonder if you'd just like to expand a little bit on that thread.
Yes, so I'll talk about this relatively briefly at paragraph 7 of the submission, and it really draws on a submission that the committee will have received from the Human Rights Commission as well. So I did not wish to repeat that which the Human Rights Commission has put forward, but I agree with their analysis. Basically, what principle 2, sub-principle 2 of clause 6 would do is it would require there to be statutory interpretation on the basis that the rights of only one group of New Zealanders, Maori, should be disregarded, unless they are reflected in a Treaty Settlement Act. And in my submission, that would be contrary to the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, 1965, and I substantiate that by reference to what the relevant Committee on Racial Discrimination found in respect of the Foreshore and Seabed Bill.
Other questions, members? I'd happily keep going, but in the absence of another, Steve.
No, you go, Duncan. You go, Duncan.
Look, I'm in
a mandate, whatever type of mandate that might be. Fiddling around with the foundations of the Constitution is one that is troubling to me, and I think to an awful lot of people. I think one of the reasons why there's been such a reaction or response to this particular bill is it's made people realize how potentially fragile the foundations of the Constitution can be, because the legal protections that are in place for them in New Zealand are not strong. So that what typically, in order to be able to protect constitutional foundations, what you need is very strong public reaction and a process in which that reaction can be captured and brought forward. Now, here there is a process. One can criticize it in terms of how we've got here, and I'm sure I know many submitters have, but at least there is a process for discussion and engagement of sorts. But that will not always be the case. And that concerns me greatly, that Parliament would seek to change constitutional foundations without a mandate and without a process. And that's why I've suggested a constitutional commission which takes it somewhat out of the political realm. That's not to say politics is not relevant. Plainly it is. But gives everybody a space and a venue within which you can actually have deep engagement without sloganeering.
Kia ora, thank you for that, Andrew.
Steve,
And
sorry, you had a...
look, we haven't got time for another question.
That's fine.
I will note that there's a book that you've authored if anyone's interested in constitutional review. But kia ora, thank you very much for your submission and also for taking the time to present.
Kia ora, thank you for your time.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm just okay. Look, members, we can't get our next submission. We're running a little over time anyway, so we will break for lunch at this point, and we're coming back at 12:45. All right, kia ora.